Chapter 774. With these two matters added together, it would no longer be a question of whether he should act or not, but rather leave the imperial court with the impression of incompetence. If the Wang clan and the king of Song used this point to make trouble for him, he might even lose his position as Qixi Protector General. When the time came, not even he would have anything to say. Not only that, it would have been fine if it had been anyone else, but it just had to be Dian Mengpoj who had killed his subordinate. Although He Yi and the others said nothing, Fomin Linta could sense that they were all waiting for him to take action and avenge Pulin He and the other Qixi soldiers. If he did nothing, he would lose the morale of his army, and if things went wrong, he might even be deserted by his own people. Pass on my order. The army is to move out and immediately head to this place. However, they are not to enter the battlefield without my order. In addition, no one is to act on their own. Anyone who disobeys will be executed. Fomin Linta said. Yes. He Yi was overjoyed. He responded and flew away. On the other side, Fomin Linta inwardly sneered as he turned to Wang Chong, his eyes flashing with cold light. No matter how this brat schemed against him, if he really believed that he would help him, he was gravely mistaken. Dian Mengpoj had to be killed, and the Qixi Protectorate could not just stand by and watch. However, that would only happen after Wang Chong and his 5,000 soldiers had been completely wiped out. At the very least, he would not act until Wang Chong was dead. Wang Chong had thought that by choosing the triangular gap as the battlefield, he would be able to draw out the Uzan Empire's great general and brigadier generals and borrow his strength. That was truly too naive. He would act, but not in the way that brat imagined. Milord, Fomin Linta really has appeared. At the same time, at the back of the vast Uzan army, a few figures with powerful auras were also looking towards Fomin Linta's direction. The entire area was filled with Uzan scouts. There were green sea eagles, rock eagles, vultures, there was nothing that could escape their eyes. Continue to pay attention. As long as Fomin Linta doesn't act rashly, it will be enough. Dusong Mengpoj stroked his mustache, his expression indifferent, exuding the air of someone who had a well-thought-out plan in the palm of his hand. Also, keep an eye on the Qixi Protectorate. Tell General Dian Mengpoj that I'll deal with Fomin Linta. Yes, my lord. A few messengers received the order and quickly left. Putting aside the movements of Fomin Linta and Dusong Mengpoj, Dian Mengpoj was leading an army of tens of thousands, including 5,000 white braves, toward the triangular gap in the northeast. With Dusong Mengpoj accompanying him, Dian Mengpoj had no worries about Fomin Linta. All he could see was Wang Chong. Bastard! That damn thing! Dian Mengpoj clenched his teeth, his mind seething with killing intent. This immature Tang dynasty youth had used 20,000 elephant majestic recruits, 7,000 Qinghai soldiers, and the head of Commander Dian Pugiel to take revenge on him for killing the 5,000 Qixi soldiers and Pulin He. Then he had swiftly advanced to the plateau, built a city, and launched an offensive to clear away the factions on the edge of the Uzan Plateau. His speed and frequency had simply surpassed his imagination. Dian Mengpoj had always believed that he was active enough, that he was crazy enough in leading his troops, but he had never imagined that there would be someone even crazier than he was. Once I break through your army, I'll tear you to pieces to vent the anger in my heart. Dian Mengpoj clenched his fists, his mind in a frenzy. Wang Chong was openly provoking him, and Dian Mengpoj was well aware that Wang Chong was coming for him. Stop! When he was still 20,000 some zhang from Wang Chong, Dian Mengpoj raised his right palm and ordered the army to stop. The mighty army of tens of thousands of soldiers suddenly stopped in a tide-like line. Zirin, Luosang, Deji, follow me. Dian Mengpoj waved his hand, and several white braves officers and 10 some elite white braves galloped toward the triangular gap, toward the silver-white steel walls. Behind the city walls, the towering steel city that was still under construction was extremely eye-catching. Dian Mengpoj's expression turned gloomy, his face turning even more unsightly. He had naturally not forgotten that night of siege. Even though he had personally led the 2,000-some elite white braves, they had been powerless in front of Wushang's massive city of steel. From before the battle to after, the sturdy gates of the city of steel had never been opened. Now, Wang Chong was clearly trying to repeat the same trick and bring it to the plateau. Just the thought of this action was enough to infuriate Dian Mengpoj. Interesting. The master has arrived. On the high walls, Wang Chong smiled when he saw Dian Mengpoj and his 10-some subordinates approaching in a cloud of dust. Let's go take a look as well. Descending the walls, Wang Chong mounted his white-hoofed shadow and led his subordinates toward the front of the formation. The atmosphere was tense, and the movements of the two commanders quickly attracted everyone's attention. The galloping of hooves was like a thunderclap as they rapidly approached. Around 100 zhang from the formation, the neighing of warhorses and a cloud of dust could be heard as Dian Mengpoj and his 10-some elite white braves came to a halt 100 zhang away. The warhorse sneezed and stomped its hooves on the spot. Dian Mengpoj sat motionlessly on his divine snow mountain colt, which was as white as snow but had 4 blood-red hooves. His cold and sinister gaze swept over the defensive line that Wang Chong had set up in front of the triangular gap, carefully examining each wall, each crack, not letting go of a single detail in an attempt to find the best opening. During this entire process, Dian Mengpoj did not make a single sound, but there was an invisible pressure that made one shiver. "Marquis, is this Dian Mengpoj?" A vigorous voice came from behind him. While Dian Mengpoj was examining Wang Chong, another mountainous figure was also examining him. At the very front of the 5,000 Wushang cavalry stood Li Sai and Wang Chong, their gazes cold and aloof. When Dian Mengpoj had launched a sneak attack on Wushang, Li Sai had not been in the City of Steel, but in Wushang, training new recruits. But it was precisely because of this that Li Sai immediately felt a deep sense of guilt and self-blame when he returned and heard of this matter. As a guard and Wang Chong's closest follower, not being present at such a crucial moment was a dereliction of duty. Fortunately, Wang Chong had relied on his own abilities to escape and scare off Dian Mengpoj. Otherwise, if something had really happened, Li Sai would never be able to forgive himself. And the best way to make up for this mistake was to kill Dian Mengpoj and cut off his head. "Ha, it's him." Wang Chong chuckled and nodded. In this period of time, Dian Mengpoj's aura had grown much more vigorous. It seemed like he had made significant progress in his martial arts. Alas, no matter how much progress he had made, he would die today. "Li Sai, don't get careless," Wang Chong indifferently said as he looked into the distance. Dian Mengpoj is an individual on the level of Brigadier General Uzun, second only to Fomin Linta and Dusong Mengpoj. Thus, even though the Qixi Protectorate is right in front of him, he doesn't have any misgivings. In addition, his way of doing things is bold and unconstrained, and he doesn't play his cards according to common sense. He suffered a setback at Wushang, but he wasn't the slightest bit dispirited after his defeat. On the contrary, before he returned, he turned around and attacked the Qixi Protectorate, killing Pulin He. In short, this fellow is extremely difficult to deal with. "You must be careful. Your subordinate understands," Li Sai replied, but his face remained impassive. His eyes had been locked on Dian Mengpoj this entire time. The atmosphere was deathly still, the two commanders staring at each other, neither saying a word. Interesting. Seeing that Dian Mengpoj was not moving, neither advancing or retreating, only sitting there on his warhorse with a gloomy expression, Wang Chong inwardly grinned. He lightly squeezed his horse's abdomen and suddenly walked out of the gap between the two walls. This movement instantly attracted the attention of both sides. Even the distant Fomin Linta couldn't help but look over. "Milord, this brat is quite bold. Isn't he afraid that Dian Mengpoj will suddenly attack and kill him? After all, that Dian is a brigadier general." A voice whispered to Fomin Linta. "It's not that he's not afraid, but he doesn't think that Dian Mengpoj will make a move." Fomin Linta frowned and said after thinking for a moment. Although he really hoped that Wang Cheng's judgment was wrong and that Dian Mengpoj would single-handedly charge in and kill Wang Cheng, Fomin Linta knew that Wang Cheng's judgment was most likely correct. It wasn't that Dian Mengpoj was soft-hearted, but that the second son of the Wang clan was much more skilled and difficult to deal with than anyone could imagine. If it was really that easy, Dian Mengpoj would have already succeeded last time. Pay close attention. Tell Heba Yi that once that brat is killed, the army is to attack at any time and immediately retreat. At that time, not only will we be able to shirk all responsibility, but I can also send a memorial to push all the blame onto that brat and the Wang clan behind him. Fomin Linta gritted his teeth and said coldly. Yes. The other general immediately flew off. Fomin Linta nodded, and then he turned his head and continued to look into the distance. He didn't care if Dian Mengpoj attacked or not, because Wang Cheng's fate had long since been sealed. With his meager forces, even if he were to face Dian Mengpoj and Dusong Mengpoj, one brigadier general and one great general, the only thing awaiting him would be death. Fomin Linta couldn't think of any way he could possibly survive such an attack. Enjoy it. Youthful arrogance always comes with a price. A cold light flashed through Fomin Linta's eyes, but he quickly regained his composure. Chapter 775. Dian Mengpoj, we meet again. Did you receive my gift? Wang Cheng gripped the reins and slowly rode forward, a smirk on his face. Buzz. Dian Mengpoj's face instantly darkened, his eyes seething with rage. He naturally understood what Wang Cheng was talking about. The gift Wang Cheng spoke of was undoubtedly the 27,000 soldiers of Zhangsheng training camp and the Dian clan's Dian Pujial. There's no need to worry. You'll soon receive my gift. Dian Mengpoj rode forward and coldly stared at Wang Cheng, a savage light in his eyes. Ha ha ha, then I'm truly looking forward to it. Wang Cheng heartily laughed. He wasn't afraid of Dian Mengpoj attacking, but he was afraid that Dian Mengpoj wouldn't. After all, he still had the threat to Qishi that he had to deal with. Given Dian Mengpoj's personality, he would never easily back down from these words. That's right, Dian Mengpoj, besides you, I've also prepared a gift for the Uzun Empire. Do you see the city behind me? In the future, these cities will be built deep into the Uzun Plateau, all the way to the Tsenpo's royal capital. I've always admired His Majesty the Tsenpo, so I've built this city beneath the royal capital to express my respect. Impudent. Dian Mengban's eyes chilled at these words, and he flew into a rage. Even in the rear of the army, Dusong Mengpoj couldn't help but frown at these words. Wang Cheng's words were clearly a naked threat, and unlike his conflict with Dian Mengpoj, this was a direct threat to the Tsenpo of the Uzun Empire. In the Uzun Empire, the Tsenpo had a supreme status, the incarnation of a god. Wang Cheng's words were something no Uzun general could tolerate. Kid, you're courting death. Dian Mengpoj closed his eyes and took a deep breath. No one had ever dared to be so arrogant and despotic in front of him. All of his previous opponents had trembled in front of him. Even Pulin He's face was full of fear and his whole body was trembling when he died. Dian Mengpoj had never been provoked to such an extent. All arrogance has a price to pay. I will definitely trample your corpse under my horse's hooves, cut off your head, and stick it on the edge of the plateau as a warning to others. Let all the Tang people know the consequences of provoking me. Ha ha ha, I'm different from you. Killing you is just the process, not the goal. In the future, I will drive the entire Uzun Empire out of Qishi, completely resolving the threat to Qishi. Not only that, I will thrust the banner of the Tang dynasty into the heart of Uzun and utterly crush Uzun. This will also serve as a warning to others, letting everyone know the consequences of making an enemy of the Tang dynasty. Wang Cheng heartily laughed. Buzz. In the rear, Dusong Mengpoj had been completely focused on Fomin Linta, but when he heard Wang Cheng's words, he couldn't help but furrow his brow. The distant Fomin Linta also couldn't help but raise his brow. "Milord, The eyes of the Chishi Protectorate scouts next to Foman Linta brightened, and they subconsciously turned to Foman Linta. Although they were opponents, even the soldiers of the Chishi Protectorate army couldn't help but feel admiration for Wang Cheng's words and view him in a higher light. All of you, shut your mouths. Foman Linta harshly rebuked, his face extremely gloomy. He naturally knew what his subordinates wanted to say, but the more they did, the crazier his jealousy became, and the heavier his killing intent became. No matter what, this brat can't be allowed to live. Foman Linta clenched his fists, his knuckles cracking. The more outstanding Wang Cheng was, the greater the threat he posed to the Hu. No matter what, he could not be allowed to live. But Foman Linta had no idea that there was someone who wanted to kill Wang Cheng more than he did. If Dian Mengpoj had only been angry at the start, then when he heard Wang Cheng's words, Dian Mengpoj was about to go mad with rage. Wang Cheng, if you wanted to anger me, you succeeded. I've changed my mind. I won't let you die so easily. Don't you care a lot about Chishi? I will kill all the soldiers of Chishi one by one and make the Tang dynasty's Chishi Protectorate a thing of the past. Dian Mengpoj gave an angry laugh, his expression savage. Let's go. Before he could finish speaking, Dian Mengpoj turned and left. Behind them, the White Braves followed closely behind as they galloped off into the distance. Suke, pass on my order. All soldiers, get ready. A major battle is about to begin. Wang Cheng narrowed his eyes as he watched Dian Mengpoj leave. Yes, Marquis. Suke quickly turned and left. Li Sai, I'm afraid that we really don't have a path of retreat. We must kill Dian Mengpoj. Wang Cheng said, looking forward. Marquis, give the order. This general will do his utmost. Li Sai sternly said. Wang Cheng nodded, silently looking in Dian Mengpoj's direction. Dian Mengpoj was a madman. Once he set his sights on a target, he would madly attack it. This was how he had exhausted the soldiers of the Chishi Protectorate. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a mission called The Threat to Chishi. Dian Mengpoj's final words had made him recall many things. Wang Cheng was now worried that his actions would bring forward Dian Mengpoj's madness. There was no way out now. If he wanted to avoid Dian Mengpoj's madness and prevent the Chishi Protectorate from repeating the same mistakes, he had to kill him here and now. Hiya! Wang Cheng urged his horse to turn around and return to the center of the formation. On the other side, 2,000 zhang away, the neighing of warhorses could be heard. As Dian Mengpoj returned to his camp, all eyes were focused on Dian Mengpoj, all of them waiting for Dian Mengpoj's order. Milord, should we attack now? An Uzun general asked, a vicious killing intent in his eyes. There's no rush. Without my order, no one is allowed to act rashly. To everyone's surprise, Dian Mengpoj waved his hand and rejected the general's proposal. His eyes were cold, his gaze still fixed on the silver steel walls that resembled fish scales, but there was not the slightest ripple of emotion on his face. General, the surrounding officers were all dumbfounded. When Dian Mengpoj had first returned, his face had been frighteningly gloomy. Everyone had believed that he would immediately give the order to attack, but to their surprise, Dian Mengpoj's reaction was completely different from what they had imagined. Dian Mengpoj said nothing, nor did he offer any explanation. His expression was so calm that it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. At this moment, the only people who could maintain their composure were the White Braves who had followed Dian Mengpoj through many campaigns. That brat is intentionally provoking Milord. He's seeking his own destruction. The White Braves followed Dian Mengban's gaze to the other side, and they could clearly hear the entire conversation. That young marquis of the Tang dynasty had intentionally stepped forward to provoke Milord. And in truth, he had succeeded. But if he thought that by infuriating Milord, he would have his way, then he was gravely mistaken. Crazy was not the same as impetuous, much less stupid. At least, it was not so in Milord's eyes. The White Braves had followed Dian Mengpoj through many campaigns and were extremely familiar with his personality. The angrier and crazier Milord was, the calmer and more rational he was. This was why Milord was called the Imperial Brigadier General, the Azura of the Plateau, and not the Madman of the Plateau. Zurin, have you prepared the things I had you prepare? Dian Mangpoj suddenly said, his eyes still fixed on the other side, his voice extremely calm. Milord, they have been prepared. The several dozen tribes in the vicinity of the northern border have all received Milord's summons and set out several hours ago. They should arrive soon. A voice in the Uzun language rang out. Behind Dian Mangpoj, an Uzun general of about 31 or 32 years of age, whose cheeks were flushed with the color of the plateau, bowed and said. Very good. Wait for my orders. Dian Mangpoj said. Yes, my lord. Zai Rinqing said. The surroundings were silent. Although nothing could be seen, an invisible tension was gathering, and the atmosphere was becoming more and more tense. At this moment, everyone was waiting for Dian Mangpoj's orders. Kid, you'll definitely regret what you've done. Only death can wash away your stupidity. Dian Mangpoj's face was ashen, and his eyes flashed with madness. Dian Mangpoj knew very well what Wang Chong was doing and why he was doing it. Only an idiot like Boluhu would recklessly charge into those silver walls of steel that were as numerous as the stars in the sky or on a chessboard. The Uzun cavalry was most formidable in their echelon formation, and no empire could compete with the Uzun in their understanding of the echelon formation. If the formation fell into chaos, what power would it have? And those steel walls, Dian Mangpoj had not forgotten that Daluan Ruozan and Hushu Wuzong had been defeated by these steel walls in the southwest. If Wang Chong thought that he would charge forward recklessly after being enraged, then he was underestimating him too much. He would indeed attack, but it would not be in the way he imagined it to be. Marquis, they still haven't attacked. Li Sai suddenly said as he gazed at the triangular gap in front of the army. Wang Chong nodded and frowned slightly. His expression was solemn. This Dian Mangpoj is more difficult to deal with than we thought. At first, I thought that since he came in a menacing manner and had the advantage in strength, he would launch an attack soon. Now it seems. I'm afraid I've underestimated him. When Dian Mangpoj left, his eyes were terrifyingly gloomy. Even a blind man could see the anger in his eyes. But after such a long time, the enemy's warhorses neighed, but they still didn't make any moves to attack. As expected of the threat of Qixi. Killing him won't be that easy. Chapter 776. Dian Mangpoj was even calmer than he had imagined, and this was not a good omen. But the more Dian Mangpoj was like this, the more Wang Chong wanted to get rid of him. A person who acted crazily but was also cool-headed was definitely a powerful foe of the Tang dynasty. For the sake of Qixi and the Central Plains, he had to think of a way to get rid of him. Moo! Just as he was thinking, a strange roar suddenly came from the opposite side. The war horses neighed, and the atmosphere of the battlefield was somber. This roar was exceptionally ear-piercing. Wang Chong suddenly raised his head. He saw that the vast army of Uzun soldiers had suddenly become restless. And in front of the Uzun army, Dian Mangpoj gave Wang Chong a profound glance, a strange light in his eyes. Suddenly, he pulled on the reins, turned his horse around, and vanished into the army. Marquis, something's wrong. That's not the sound of a warhorse. Su Kei suddenly said. Logically speaking, when two armies were fighting and both sides were riding horses, there shouldn't be any sound other than that of a warhorse. But no matter what, that roar just now was definitely not that of a warhorse. It really isn't a warhorse. Wang Chong sternly said, his expression grave. Su Kei had only heard that something was wrong, but Wang Chong had already recognized what it was. That's the Uzun's, yaks. Rumble. As if in response to Wang Chong's words, the earth suddenly quaked and a heaven-shaking boom came from across the battlefield. More than 2,000 zhang away, the vast Tibetan army parted like a wave. In the middle of the army were tens of thousands of black yaks, roaring and stamping their hooves, their sharp horns aimed at the distant city of steel as they galloped at full speed. Che! The muscles of the thousands of black yaks bulged, their moos rising and falling like waves in the sea. Behind them, a cloud of dust soared into the sky. In an instant, everyone's expressions changed. Marquis! Everyone paled and turned to Wang Chong. No one had expected the Uzun to use this sort of tactic in a battle of cavalry. These yaks lived on the plateau and had massive bodies, sharp horns, and bulging muscles. Charging at this speed, each of them had the strength of nearly 1,000 jin. Tens of thousands of horns of the plateau charged in through the gaps in the high walls. The first wave would probably cause chaos on his side. Marquis, these yaks are blocking their ears. Cheng Sanyuan suddenly said, his expression fraught with worry. He had participated in the War of the Southwest with Wang Chong, and at the time, Jelifeng had used the elephants of Mengshi Zhao's forest to charge, but Wang Chong had used the lion's roar to frighten them into fleeing. On the other hand, the Mengshi, Yusang army had been thrown into chaos. But this time, it was different. The yaks had extremely long and thick fur that covered their ears, greatly reducing the effect of the sound. But right now, all the yaks were still using something to block their ears. It was obvious that Dian Mangpoj and the others had learned their lesson from the War of the Southwest and were prepared for this move. The winds howled, and the air was fraught with tension. Each rumble of the yaks seemed to be stomping on the hearts of the soldiers. Everyone subconsciously turned to Wang Chong. That brat from the Wang clan is probably dead this time. In the distance, Foman Linta was also observing the battlefield. Even though Foman Linta hated Dian Mangpoj to the bone and wanted nothing more than to kill him with his own hands. But even Foman Linta had to admit that this Uzun madman was rather formidable. If the other Uzun commanders had the advantage in numbers, they would charge recklessly. The dead Buluhu was the best example. But Dian Mangpoj was different. He seemed crazy, irascible, and his actions did not follow common sense at all. But he was also terrifyingly thorough. He had the white braves and 40 to 50,000 soldiers. Even in the face of such an overwhelming victory, he was still able to endure. In addition, he had mobilized thousands of yaks to serve as the vanguard. If Foman Linta had been in Wang Chang's shoes, he would not have been able to survive such meticulousness. Wang Chang's only path of retreat was to retreat through the triangular gap and return to Wushang. But if he did so, the 9,000 craftsmen behind him would be reduced to ghosts under the hooves of Uzun's cavalry. If that brat really dared to do so, Foman Linta would submit memorials to him until he died. Ha, if the heavens do this, you can still live. You can't live if you do this to yourself. Foman Linta sneered as he looked at Wang Chong and the 5,000 Wushang cavalry like he was looking at a dead man. He had no sympathy for Wang Chong. Since he had overestimated his own strength and dared to enter the plateau, it was easy to imagine the consequences. Moreover, this brat had dared to oppose him. "Milord, look!" Just as he was thinking, he heard a cry of alarm. Foman Linta's eyelids twitched. He raised his head and saw a sudden change in the distance. Just after the first wave of yaks, thousands of special cavalry suddenly rushed to the front from Dian Mangpoj's camp. These cavalry had a large white sack on each side. Each of them sat on their horses, put their hands into the sack, grabbed something, and raised it. Whoosh! In an instant, countless amounts of white powder shot into the air. As the air current surged, it created a vast expanse of white fog on this plateau. The speed of the air was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it had caught up to the charging yaks and spread rapidly. In just a few breaths' time, the plateau was filled with white fog. Even Foman Linta could not see what was going on. Woo! The bleak and sonorous yak horns began to blare, the earth quaking, and the neighing of thousands of horses could be heard in the white fog. Dian Mangban's army had also begun to move out. At first, it was only a slight tremor, but in an instant, the earth shook and the sky shook. Who knew how many Uzun cavalry charged forward? Buzz! In this instant, even Fomenlinta's eyelids twitched, and his expression changed. The yaks were in front, the white fog was covering them, and the army was behind. Dayan Mangpo's attacks came wave after wave. This kind of attack was like a raging storm. It would only take one wave for Wang Chong, the 5,000 Wushang cavalry, and the 8,000 craftsmen behind them to be completely annihilated. Inform Heba Yi to speed up the march. Enter the battlefield at any time. Fomenlinta suddenly turned around and said. Yes, milord. A horseman galloped away. Dayan Mangpo had sent all his army to destroy Wang Chong in one wave. Now that the formation was in disarray, it was the best time for the Qixi Protectorate to attack. Marquis. In the distance, an uneasy mood filled the air. Everyone was waiting for Wang Chong's decision. The yak's charge was deafening, and it was so close that it was difficult to even hear one's voice. Not only that, but the white powder quickly spread out, covering the surroundings in a vast expanse of whiteness. Even the city of steel they were in was affected. Even with Su Ke and Qing Sanyuan's cultivation, they could only see 10-some meters away. The yaks, the white powder, and the tens of thousands of Uzun cavalry behind them, the entire Wushang cavalry was in a precarious situation. Wang Chong said nothing. Dayan Mangpo was even more difficult and terrifying to deal with than he had imagined. Dayan Mangpo seemed crazy, but he was actually extremely meticulous. In order to deal with his beehives, he had gathered the yaks to break through the formation. Not only that, he had even used the direction of the airflow and the white powder to create a fog that covered the entire battlefield. This white fog made it very difficult for Wang Chong's formations to display their power. Without a target, the cavalry were like headless flies, and their power was greatly reduced. More importantly, the Tibetan army, following behind the yak formation, was already beginning to pick up speed. If Wang Chong wanted to imitate them, he would have to charge out from behind the silver-white city of steel, but that would mean running into the tens of thousands of plateau yaks. In these circumstances, before Wang Chong could even begin fighting with Dayan Mangpo, he would have lost more than half of his cavalry. In any case, Dayan Mangpo had given himself a difficult problem. Wang Chong said nothing. He could clearly hear everyone's voices, and he could sense the anxiety of his army, but Wang Chong's face remained calm and unperturbed. The more critical the situation, the calmer his mind became. No matter what strategy Dayan Mangpo used, no matter what methods he used, he would not retreat, much less lose. Rumble. The quaking of the earth grew more and more intense, each sound like it was stomping on his heart. 100 zhang, 80 zhang, 60 zhang, the tens of thousands of yaks that Dayan Mangpo had used as the vanguard were galloping closer and closer. Wang Chong could even smell the unique stench of the yaks through the white fog. The atmosphere was growing tenser and tenser. Hiss! Suddenly, Wang Chong's nose twitched and he raised his head. As he looked up at the white fog that filled the battlefield, a strange sensation surged into his mind. This smell, it's Highland barley flour. At the last moment, Wang Chong's eyes brightened and he suddenly laughed. This was called being too clever for one's own good. In order to deal with him, Dayan Mangpo had used yaks and white powder. The best way to deal with him would have been to use lime. Alas, the plateau did not have that much lime, so Dayan Mangpo had used Highland barley flour as a substitute. The people of Uzun raised cattle and sheep and planted Highland barley. Highland barley was their only crop, and it was also the easiest thing to obtain to replace lime. The idea was correct, but unfortunately, Dayan Mangpo had run into him. Li Sai, pass on my order. All soldiers are to dismount. When I give the order, all men and horses are to be prepared to lie down at any moment. Chapter 777. Ah! The surrounding soldiers were dumbfounded. The yaks were about to charge and the army was about to close in. Weren't they just waiting to be trampled by the enemy if they lay on the ground? But, Marquis, Dian Mangpoj is about to arrive. Su Shixian said anxiously. Although the others said nothing, they all had the same expression on their faces. They had always trusted in Wang Chong, but this order was too illogical. The Uzun's attacks were not as simple as the Yaks. In just a few moments, they could already hear the roars of the Uzun army behind them. Even if they lay on the ground and hid behind the steel walls to endure the attack of the Yaks, they wouldn't be able to escape the Uzun army behind them. Dismounting and hiding on the ground at this crucial moment was suicidal. This was not just a simple matter of the 5,000 Wushang cavalry. If they were defeated, the 8,000 craftsmen in the city behind them would also become ghosts under the Uzun cavalry. No buts. Just do as I say. Wang Chong said firmly, looking forward. Yes. Su Shixian clenched his teeth and left. Although he still felt that Wang Chong's order wasn't very appropriate, as long as Wang Chong was certain that this was necessary, Su Shixian would not disobey. 50 zhang, 40 zhang, 30 zhang, 20 zhang, everyone's heartstrings were stretched taut. Through the thick white mist, they could even see the Yaks' flaring nostrils and their eyes that were as bright and crazy as copper bells. Their huge bodies and towering backs were like small mountains. Moo! Moo! The moos of the Yaks echoed through the world like massive waves. And even more frightening than the Yaks were the crazed shouts of the thousands of Tibetan cavalry. All soldiers, hear my order. Follow behind the Yaks and kill the Tang people to avenge the mountain army. To dare build a city on the plateau is suicidal. Everyone, follow me. The general has ordered that whoever kills that brat named Wang Chong will be made a general and rewarded with the Great Snow Mountain's secret techniques. Don't let a single Tang people escape. Go! The war horses neighed. Tens of thousands of Uzun cavalrymen waved their machetes and shouted crazily. Although the white mist was effective against them, all the Uzun cavalrymen only needed to line up in a trapezoidal formation, cover their mouths and noses with coarse cloth, and follow closely behind the Yaks. Only death awaits those who dare to insult the general. Brat, do you really think you're safe behind the city walls? Everything comes with a price. This time, I will let everyone know the consequences of going against me and provoking Uzun. In the middle of the army, Dian Mangpoj rode on the snow-white divine steed of the Great Snow Mountain. His eyes shone with a ferocious and crazy light. No matter how Wang Chong responded, he would not be able to escape death. He could already imagine how he would behead Wang Chong and plant his head on the edge of the plateau as a warning to the entire Tang dynasty. All soldiers, hear my order. Advance at full speed. With Dian Mangpoj's order, the army immediately accelerated, the rumbling of the earth growing louder and louder. Buzz! The rumbling of the earth grew louder and louder, and all the grass on the plateau rustled and trembled. As the army approached, the atmosphere grew tenser and tenser. 100 feet, 80 feet, 60 feet, 40 feet, rumble. Finally, thousands of Yaks mooed and madly charged into the city of steel. The atmosphere was so tense that even time seemed to stop. Get down! A loud shout resounded through the world. Almost at the same time, the sound of a bowstring vibrating could be heard from the rear of the army. No one noticed that an arrow had shot out like a bolt of lightning from the steel city behind them, heading straight for the army. And at the tip of the arrow, there was an extremely conspicuous spot of flame. Rumble. It seemed like only a split second had passed, but it also seemed like countless long centuries. Suddenly, an earth-shattering explosion came from the sky. Under the horrified gazes of countless people, a dazzling crimson fireball exploded violently in the sky. This was like the first signal. Then, with a rumble, the entire battlefield, all the areas filled with white smoke, exploded violently. This massive noise drowned out the mooing of the Yaks, the shouting of battle, the clopping of hooves, and the quaking of the earth. All other sounds seemed insignificant in comparison to this explosion, like the buzzing of a mosquito to a thunderclap. The violent explosion also triggered a terrifying shockwave that covered a large area. The strong yaks that were madly charging over let out miserable cries and were instantly sent flying like rice straws, as if they were weightless. The Uzun cavalry following closely behind the yaks were completely caught off guard. Aya! With screams, these Uzun and their horses were sent flying far away by the shockwave. Some of them were thrown into the air, blown to pieces by the successive explosions. Others were sent flying into the grass. They appeared fine on the surface, but inside their bodies, all their internal energy and organs had been sent flying. Blood flowed from their orifices as they died on the spot. Not only that, the fierce explosions had also unleashed a terrifying sea of fire. The entire battlefield, including the city of steel behind Wangchong, had been transformed into a sea of fire of unprecedented scale. The air within the battlefield, as well as the lungs of some of the Uzun cavalry, was completely incinerated. Before these Uzun cavalry could even react, they had already suffocated to death. Boom boom boom. Wave after wave of explosions, screams, neighing, and mooing filled the air, throwing the battlefield into chaos. Impossible! How could there be such a thing? In the distance, Fomin Linta saw this inconceivable sight, his entire body trembling, and he couldn't help but cry out. As a top-class general of the Tang dynasty and a titan of the Hu generals, Fomin Linta had spent his entire life on the battlefield. He had seen all kinds of battles and was extremely experienced. But not even Fomin Linta had ever encountered such a thing. He had already ordered Heba Yi to bring his army to the edge of the battlefield. All he needed was an order to charge through the gap where Dian Mengpo's Zuzan army would fall into chaos after killing Wang Chong. But Fomin Linta had never expected such a thing to happen. It was just a few arrows, but Wang Chong had created such a large-scale explosion and such a terrifying sea of fire, and it had happened right in front of him. Even though he was very far away, Fomin Linta could still feel the searing waves of heat. At this moment, Fomin Linta's mind was in turmoil, and he felt an unprecedented shock. Everything before him had completely surpassed common sense and common sense. How could an imperial great general like Fomin Linta? Even if he was right next to him and had witnessed the entire process, he still wouldn't be able to understand how Wang Chong had managed to create such a massive explosion. Even an imperial great general like Fomin Linta couldn't understand what was going on. Kaiyil! Kaiyil! Before Fomin Linta could think too much, the distant cries of fighting shook the entire steppe. After this wave of explosions, the Wushang cavalry led by Wang Chong finally began to attack. Nay! Wang Chong's robes fluttered in the wind as he was the first to leap out from behind the silver-white walls, his white hooves flapping in the wind. Behind him, all the Wushang cavalry mounted their horses and formed into neat ranks, neighing as they followed Wang Chong. Wang Chong and the others had also been caught up in that wave of explosions. Fortunately, Wang Chong had warned everyone, including their horses, to lie down and lean against the walls. As a result, almost no one had been injured. And the steel walls in the rear were more than 6 zhang tall, allowing them to block the white barley powder, allowing the craftsmen in the city to escape disaster. All soldiers, hear my order. Attack! Wang Chong unsheathed his sword, his cold and determined voice echoing through the heavens. Boom! The mountains and rivers trembled and the earth was silent. In a flash, the 5,000 Wushang cavalry, along with the 1,000 elites of the old tribes of the southwest, surged out from behind the silver-white walls like a tide, seething with killing intent. At this moment, the explosions had stopped, the sea of fire had been extinguished, all the white barley powder had been burned away, and the white smoke that shrouded the battlefield had finally dissipated. The scene on the battlefield began to become clear to the eyes. In front of Wang Chong's steel defenses, corpses were strewn all over the ground in a radius of nearly 1,000 zhang. One after another, the yaks were roasted until their bodies were charred black, and they were sprawled on the ground. The thick black fur on their bodies had become one of the fatal triggers in this explosion and sea of fire. Tens of thousands of yaks lay on the ground, their bodies burned bare. They had suffered the greatest impact in this wave of explosions. And behind these yaks were the corpses of countless Uzun cavalry. These people were brave and skilled warriors of the plateau, all of them riding on sturdy highland steeds. Because they were standing high up, when the air burned and the shockwaves struck them, they suffered the greatest impact and shock. But the greatest impact and shock came from their minds. Even now, none of the Uzun soldiers knew what had happened. Just the thought of that explosion was enough to make one tremble in fear. But no matter what the Uzun thought, Wang Chang's strategy had been successfully carried out. The 5,000 Wushang cavalry, together with the 1,000 elites of the old tribes of the southwest, formed into an arrow formation and charged from the rear like a tide. Swish! A sharp saber slashed through the air. One of the Uzun cavalrymen standing at the very front, closest to the steel walls, did not even have time to react before his bewildered face was slashed across the neck. His massive head flew high into the air. And all this was only the beginning. Rumble. The earth rumbled as tens of thousands of Wushang cavalry surged out, destroying everything in their path. The moment Wang Chong had chosen was precisely when the Uzun had suffered heavy losses, their morale had plummeted, their formation had collapsed, and even their speed had fallen to rock bottom. At this moment, it was truly a crushing defeat. Ah! Chapter 778. Dian Mangpoj, come. Let's fight to the death. Wang Chong roared with laughter as he rode the white-hoofed shadow toward the battlefield. With a swing of his woozy steel sword, he immediately beheaded an Uzun horseman. With another slash, his scimitar snapped, and an Uzun rider was cleaved in two along with his horse. For an expert of Wang Chang's level, after reaching the peak of the imperial martial realm, the power of a woozy steel weapon in his hands could not even be mentioned in the same breath as before. However, Wang Chang's gaze remained fixed on the distant Dian Mangpoj. Dian Mangpoj was known as the Azura war god of the Uzun Empire. This fellow was crude on the outside but meticulous on the inside, and he always came prepared. In order to deal with Wang Chong in one fell swoop, he had hired yaks to charge the formation, and he had also found barley flour to conceal himself. Alas, his cleverness had been overruled. What Dian Mangpoj didn't know was that the barley flour he was using to make smoke could easily cause a dust explosion. Once the barley flour in the air reached a certain density, it would become the best kind of incense. Just a little flame would be enough to cause a heaven-shaking explosion. To Wang Chong, this was all common sense. But it was clear that no one in this world knew of this. And Wang Chong's strategy had succeeded. As for the result, everyone had seen it. Bastard! Dian Mangpoj clenched his fists so tightly that the veins on the back of his hands bulged, and he gritted his teeth so hard that they almost shattered. Insanity, anger, and a terrifying killing intent that he couldn't suppress. All sorts of emotions flashed past his eyes. If looks could kill, Wang Chong would have died countless times over. I will definitely kill you, I will definitely kill you. Dian Mangpoj locked onto Wang Chong, who was riding the white-hoofed shadow in the distance. He wanted to charge forward and rely on his Saint Martial Realm cultivation to kill Wang Chong with a single thrust of his spear. However, the events of the City of Steel were still fresh in his mind. Although Wang Chong's strength and cultivation were inferior to his ability to rotate his opponents and coordinate his attacks was something that even a Saint Martial Realm expert like Dian Mangpoj had to be wary of. Now, Wang Chong no longer had those 200 subordinates by his side, but he had more than 5,000 elites. His military strength was even greater than before. Meanwhile, on Dian Mangpoj's side, the earth-shattering explosion that had never happened before in the highlands had caused everyone to panic and lose their morale. The army was utterly routed and completely lost the ability to fight against Wang Chong. Retreat. Although Dian Mangpoj was extremely unwilling, he still clenched his teeth and gave the order to retreat. Rumble. The Uzun had already lost their morale to begin with, and upon hearing Dian Mangpoj's order, they immediately broke down. After them. The soldiers were invigorated by this sight and overjoyed. Boom! The halo of Dusk Stallion descended, and with a clattering of metal, it rapidly reinforced the entire army. The 5,000 Wushang cavalry charged forward in pursuit. Aya! Screams filled the air as the 5,000 Wushang cavalry swept past Uzun soldiers. 5,000, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000. When the 5,000 Wushang cavalry charged in formation, they swiftly displayed a harvest that far surpassed that of any other army in this world. The dense ranks of Uzun cavalry were scattered in a single wave. Some of the Uzun soldiers attempted to gather together and form a group to cover the rear, but they were swiftly reduced to dust by the charge of the main army. Run! Dian Mengpo's shrill voice resounded over the battlefield. At this moment, even a Saint Martial realm expert like him did not dare to linger when faced with Wang Cheng's 5,000-some Wushang cavalry, let alone the others. Stopping on their own would be suicidal, and they would not be able to stop Wang Cheng's army, much less delay them. Boom! At the most dangerous moment for the army, a horn suddenly blared across the battlefield. This horn was different from any other. It was even louder and exuded a grandeur, righteousness, and majesty that had never been heard before. At the same time, the earth rumbled as if something was catching up to the rear of the army. Stop! Wang Cheng was charging at the very front of the army. When he heard this horn, he raised his right palm and came to a sudden stop, a wary look on his face. Bzzz. The earth trembled and the grass rustled. Behind Dian Mengpo and the routed Uzun army, a black tide surged as another army of the Uzun Empire surged forward. In the distance, Wang Cheng could clearly see a tall black war banner, upon which was a white eagle and the image of a vast snowy mountain. It's Dusong Mengpo. Wang Cheng's heart chilled as he recognized that black war banner at a glance. In Wang Cheng's memories, there was only one person on the Uzun Plateau who would use a white eagle as the image of an army's banner, the eagle of the plateau, Dusong Mengpo. Withdraw. Wang Cheng waved down his right hand, giving the order to retreat. Dusong Mengpo was a great general of the Uzun Empire, even stronger than Dian Mengpo. Although Wang Cheng was not surprised that he would appear here, this was not the best time to fight him. Rumble. Wang Cheng immediately turned his horse around. Behind him, the 5,000 Wushang cavalry stopped their pursuit and began to ride toward the steel fortress at the base of the mountain. This brat, what a fast reaction! In the distance, Dusong Mengpo slightly closed his eyes at this sight. If Wang Cheng dared to pursue, he wouldn't mind slaying him with a single palm. But Wang Cheng's senses were sharper than anyone else's. Before Dusong Mengpo could strike, he had already given the order to retreat. Not even Dusong Mengpo could do anything at this moment. It seems like it's not time to kill him yet. I have to wait a little longer. Dusong Mengpo quietly said to himself. This was not his first time meeting Wang Cheng. The first time they had met was in the capital of the Tang dynasty. At the time, Dusong Mengpo had used the strategy of exchanging a leopard cat for the crown prince, using a valiant general to replace the first prince in the capital of the Tang dynasty, killing no small number of Tang dynasty experts. In the end, Wang Cheng had seen through this plan, and even Dusong Mengpo's identity had been exposed. On his way back to the capital, he had been pursued by the experts of the Tang dynasty and had almost been forced to stay in the Central Plains. That encounter had left an extremely deep impression on Dusong Mengpo. But that youth from the capital of the Tang dynasty had been far more formidable than he had imagined. Hushu Wuzong and Daluan Ruozan had been defeated in the southwest, and the hero of the Dian clan, Dian Pujiel, had been killed by him at Zhangsheng. Even Dian Mengpo had lost to him. This wise and far-sighted youth from the capital of the Tang dynasty was rapidly maturing into a threat and hidden danger to the Uzun Empire. But even though his heart was bursting with killing intent, Dusong Mengpo was forced to restrain himself. With Foman Linta, an imperial great general of the Tang dynasty, present, Dusong Mengpo had to restrain himself no matter how much he wanted to strike. Foman Linta, just what do you want? Do you want me to kill him or not? Dusong Mengpoj gave one last profound glance at the distant foeman Linta, and then he quickly looked away. Sound the gongs to withdraw. The army was in chaos, and if they wanted to sweep away the Tang dynasty's obstacle at the base of the mountain, they would have to regroup and start all over again. As the Uzun army sounded the gongs to withdraw, the first battle came to an end. In the distance, the Qixi Protectorate officers were dumbstruck. This kid's too formidable. Did he deliberately cause that explosion just now? If he did, then that's too shocking. Dayan Mengpoj has probably kicked him in the foot. This kid is even more difficult to deal with than he imagined. He's truly met his match this time. No one had expected this turn of events in the battle. The generals of the Qixi Protectorate were completely stunned by the result of this battle. These were all valiant generals of the Qixi Protectorate who had presided over Qixi for many years. They were extremely experienced in fighting and had faced all sorts of storms. But even these proud generals of the Qixi Protectorate had to admit that if they were in Wang Chang's position, they would have never been able to survive Dayan Mengpoj's frenzied assault. All of you, shut up. Foeman Linta was infuriated by the voices of the generals. Had these bastards forgotten who their enemy was? They were even praising Wang Chong. Is there nothing else to do? Go and inspect the soldiers for me. Prepare to enter the battle at any time. Yes. The generals felt their hearts chill as they hurriedly lowered their heads and left. Ha ha ha, unlike the oppressive atmosphere on the other two sides, behind the silver-white steel walls of the triangular gap, the soldiers were beaming with joy. In the small fortress behind them, the 8,000-some craftsmen who had been involved in the construction poked their heads out and excitedly cheered. Marquis! 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 The heaven-shaking cheers made Foeman Linta, the distant Dayan Mengpoj, and Uzun all grimace. Marquis, how did you do it just now? Why did that white smoke suddenly explode? After the battle, Cheng Sanyuan, Su Shixian, Su Kei, and the others gathered at Wang Chang's side, their curious gazes focused on him. In this battle, they were most curious about that explosion that had routed Uzun's army. Even now, with the battle over, that scene still seemed like a miracle to them. Everyone knew that this had to be related to Wang Chong, but no one knew how he had done it. Don't ask any more questions. I will naturally tell you in the future. Although the battle has ended for now, the war is far from over. The Uzun won't give up so easily. Wang Chong said. Yes. Hearing Wang Chong speak of proper matters, everyone's hearts trembled and they lowered their heads. Li Sai, send out scouts to take stock of the losses in this battle. Wang Chong said. This subordinate will make the arrangements. Chapter 779. Very quickly, the losses of the battle were reported. Uzun's side had lost around 5,000 to 6,000 yak corpses, only about 1,000 of them managed to survive and flee in all directions. It would take at least a few hours to find them again. And even if they managed to find them, they'd already lost their ability to fight. Furthermore, due to the previous explosion, as well as the charge of the 5,000 Wushang cavalry, Dayan Mengpoj's side had lost a total of 18,000 to 19,000 corpses, while another 6,000 to 7,000 were heavily injured by the explosion. On the other hand, Wang Chang's side's losses were negligible. This was a complete and utter victory. The only mishap occurred in the small fortress at the back. 7 to 8 craftsmen fell from the scaffolding during the explosion, while the eardrums of more than 20 people were shaken by the sound of the explosion. These were the biggest casualties on Wang Chang's side. As for the other soldiers, because they were warned beforehand, they all laid flat on the ground, avoiding the explosion and only suffered some minor scratches. As soon as this number came out, everyone was shocked. They all looked at Wang Chong with admiration. Don't celebrate too early, Wang Chong casually said. With Dayan Mengpoj's personality, he'll soon launch an attack, and it'll be even fiercer and fiercer than the first wave. Ha, what's there to be afraid of? With Marquis here, no matter how strong Dayan Mengpoj is, it won't matter. Just now, he sent so many soldiers to fight, but still suffered a crushing defeat. Now that he's lost so many soldiers, he's even less of a match for Marquis, that's right. Dayan Mangpoj has already lost to Marquis twice, he'll only lose even more miserably if he does it again. We'll deal with it as it comes, with our strength. Do we really have to be afraid of them? The generals all agreed. The battle just now had greatly boosted everyone's confidence. They trusted Wang Chong even more. Even if Wang Chong were to say that he'd lead them to conquer the entire Uzan Empire, they would still believe him without a doubt. Arrogant soldiers are bound to lose, don't be too careless. Wang Chong shook his head. Everyone had underestimated Dayan Mangpoj too much. Although he defeated Dayan Mangpoj twice, Wang Chong knew that the first time was because Dayan Mangpoj's troops were far away, so he could only rely on himself and used a combination attack to defeat him. The second time was because Dayan Mangpoj scattered barley powder to create an artificial white smoke, leaving a huge opening and using the powder explosion to defeat him. Neither of these had been proper exchanges. If one believed that Dayan Mangpoj was only SOSO just because of these two victories, one would truly be digging one's own grave and committing suicide. If Dayan Mangpoj only had this much ability, he would never have been able to kill the 5,000 soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate and Pulan He after running into a wall in the City of Steel, and he certainly wouldn't have been placed on the Stone of Destiny's list to issue a mission to threaten Qixi. Success would reward 400 points of destiny energy, failure would result in a deduction of 2,000 points. Moreover, how could someone who had been hailed as the Azura war god of the Uzan Empire, the future king of generals, only have this much ability? Everyone, there's no need to say anything. Marquis has his reasons for saying this, and I feel that Dayan Mangpoj truly is an expert. A person who can think of using a herd of yaks to charge at the enemy is definitely not as simple as all of you think. Suddenly, a powerful voice rang out, interrupting the voices of the crowd. The surroundings were silent. Everyone looked at Li Sai, who was at the side. An arrogant army is bound to fall. This battle concerns all of us, the 8,000 craftsmen behind us, and the safety of Qixi. Before the battle is over, we can't afford to be careless or careless. Before the battle is over, we cannot afford to be careless, Li Sai sternly said. Wang Chong turned to Li Sai, who was more than a head taller than him, and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Li Sai truly was worthy of being a future top-class great general. No matter the situation, he would never lose his instincts as a commander. Even in the face of a great victory, he would always be able to calmly analyze the situation and make the most rational of decisions. Everyone, go and rest. For the time being, Dayan Mangpoj shouldn't be attacking again. In addition, urge the craftsmen in the rear to speed up the construction of the city and finish the third floor as quickly as possible. This city will soon be put to use. Wang Chang's final words were like a hammer striking down the hammer, and everyone quickly left. How is it, Dayan? Do you need me to go? 2,000 zhang away, in the rear of the Uzan army, another conversation was taking place, but one side was an imperial great general of Uzan while the other side was a brigadier general. The mood was grim. The crushing defeat from before had been far too severe. Even if Dusong Mangpoj was overseeing the rear and restraining Foman Linta, he could not just sit back and watch. The casualties of nearly 20,000 Uzan cavalry was no small number. If one added on the 20,000 killed by Buluhu, they would have lost nearly 40,000 soldiers. Even a great general like Dusong Mangpoj would have to think of a way to explain this to the Tsenpo. There's no need. Dayan Mangpoj immediately refused. I was the one who started this battle, so I will personally end it. As for that Wang Chong, no matter what, I will kill him. I also have some understanding of that Wang Chong, and he's not that easy to deal with. You saw the battle just now. He's even more crafty and difficult to deal with than we imagined. You alone might not be able to deal with him. Dusong Mangpoj said. It wasn't that he didn't believe in Dayan Mangpoj, but that he had already lost 2 battles, and his losses were not small. He could not allow the soldiers the Uzan Empire used to conquer the world to be used by Dayan Mangpoj in a conflict of pride. Wang Chong was the Tsenpo's target. If Dian Mangpoj could not deal with him, then Dusong Mangpoj would have to do it himself. So you're afraid that I'll lose even more soldiers because of the heavy losses just now? Dian Mangpoj stared at Dusong Mangpoj, his eyes sharp. Dusong Mangpoj said nothing, only gave a non-committal nod. As commander-in-chief, there were some things that he had to consider. Even in front of Dian Mangpoj, there was no need for him to hide this fact. If that's the case, there's no need for you to worry, because I will personally send my white braves. I won't need any of your soldiers. Whether you agree or not, I will personally kill that Wang Chong. With these final words, Dian Mangpoj left in a huff. In the howling winds, the plateau was suffused with the smell of burning. Behind the silver-white walls of steel, Wang Chong was seated cross-legged. Next to him was the tall and muscular Li Sai, silently standing guard. Even if I defeat Uzun, killing the Saint Martial Realm Dian Mangpoj is still a difficult task. Wang Chong propped up his chin, a pensive look on his face as he stared at the ground. The mission given by the Stone of Destiny was that Wang Chong had to personally kill Dian Mangpoj. If someone else killed Dian Mangpoj, or if something happened to Dian Mangpoj, Wang Chong would not be able to complete the mission. And if something like this happened, the mission would be considered a failure, and 2,000 points of destiny energy would be deducted. Even to the current Wang Chong, this was an enormous number. After all, he had turned the tide, expended countless efforts to defeat Huishu Wuzong and Daluan Ruozan, saving the southwest, and completing the Empire's elegy, but he had only been rewarded with 2,410 points of destiny energy. The gap in cultivation is still a very large problem. I have to think of a way to increase my strength and close the distance between us. Wang Chong quietly said to himself. With a thought, Wang Chong quickly communicated with the Stone of Destiny in his mind. It was impossible to make a last-minute effort to increase his strength in a short period of time, so the only way was through the Stone of Destiny. Thinking about how he had accumulated a large amount of destiny energy after the last mission, he had yet to use it. Furthermore, after completing the Trial of Fate mission, he successfully advanced from a Fate Struggler to a Controller of Fate. The Stone of Fate had also correspondingly undergone a huge change, and the rewards he could exchange for had increased by a lot. Buzz! A moment later, the scene in front of Wang Chong changed. In the boundless darkness, a simple and unadorned, fist-sized, mysterious gem quietly floated in front of Wang Chong. This was the Stone of Destiny. Wang Chong had always been busy with matters in the real world, so it had been a long time since he had so closely examined the Stone of Destiny. After experiencing so many things, the Stone of Destiny seemed to have grown much larger, and it had gained much more luster. It was all the more dazzling and mysterious. 4030. In the upper right corner of the Stone of Destiny, Wang Chong saw an illusory line of golden numbers. Is this how much destiny energy I've accumulated? Wang Chong quietly said to himself. This thought had just flashed through his mind when countless phantoms flashed before his eyes, accompanied by a flood of information. All the rewards from the War of the Southwest, plus the ones from before, amounted to 2,410 points of destiny energy. Recruiting 5,000 Wushang soldiers from Wushang village had resulted in 600 points of destiny energy. Inventing cement had resulted in 1,000 points of destiny energy. Writing a letter to Gao Xianji had resulted in 600 points of destiny energy being deducted. The Warhorse mission had resulted in 510 points of destiny energy. All the missions up until now had resulted in a total of 4,030 points of destiny energy. As he read the information introduced by the Stone of Destiny, Wang Chong couldn't help but be startled. He had unwittingly accumulated so many points of destiny energy. Such an enormous number is enough for me to exchange for some powerful abilities. Wang Chong quietly said to himself. The Stone of Destiny would not be able to raise a person from an ordinary martial artist to a peerless expert in a single stroke. Its greater use was to influence and gradually raise one's strength. Moreover, The Stone of Destiny's rewards were not just pure strength, but also many martial arts and techniques. Chapter 780. Buzz. With a thought from Wang Chong, the scene before him changed once more. Above the Stone of Destiny, golden light flashed. Heart, body, energy, technique, power, 5 different balls of light, the 5 different rewards of the Stone of Destiny appeared before his eyes. Heart represented conviction, body represented body refining techniques, energy represented origin energy, technique represented moves and techniques, and power represented momentum and fortune. At least one of Wang Chang's Stone of Destiny rewards had been sealed, but after the Southwest War, the last 2, technique and power, had been unsealed. At this point, all the seals on the Stone of Destiny had been undone. Wang Chang's eyes turned, and he very naturally turned his attention to the energy reward that represented origin energy. Unlike its name, the Stone of Destiny did not directly reward origin energy, much less raise a martial artist's strength by a level. Instead, it rewarded many things related to origin energy, such as halos or the characteristics of stellar energy. With a thought from Wang Chong, the contents of the Stone of Destiny's origin energy rewards quickly appeared before his eyes. Compared to the Southwest War, the contents of the Stone of Destiny's rewards had once more changed. Origin Energy Pill, effective only for Origin Energy Realm martial artists. Stellar Energy Sharpness, changing the nature of stellar energy and increasing its sharpness. Stellar Energy Piercing, changing the nature of stellar energy and increasing its piercing nature, Wang Chong muttered to himself. He was already very familiar with these things. Origin Energy Pill and Stellar Energy Sharpness were of little use to the current Wang Chong. Only Stellar Energy Piercing could ignore defenses, and as the number of layers increased, its ability to ignore the opponent's level was still useful to Wang Chong. But what truly attracted Wang Chang's attention was the new contents of the Stone of Destiny. Stellar Energy Ignition increases user's Lu Wu ability by 1 level. In battle, rapidly burns away the opponent's energy. The degree of burning depends on user's strength and the opponent's level. Primary upgrade, burn a quarter of the opponent's stellar energy every 15 minutes. Only effective against Imperial martial opponents at most. Exchange points, 800. Wang Chang's eyelids couldn't help but twitch when he saw this. He clearly remembered that this ability hadn't existed the last time he saw it. The Stone of Destiny won't change for no reason. It seems that as I accumulate more points, new rewards will appear. Wang Chong thought to himself. But what truly attracted his attention was the words only targeting the power of Lu Wu. This kind of reward had never appeared before. It seemed that the Stone of Destiny could tailor some special rewards to the host's needs. In truth, I already have 2 supreme arts on me. One is the Great Yin-Yang Heaven Creation Art, and the other is the Art of God and Demon Slayer, but neither of them have caused a change in the Stone of Destiny. Only the power of Lu Wu has become a reward for the Stone of Destiny. Just what is the origin of this power of Lu Wu? Wang Chang's mind was in turmoil as he recalled the men in black he had encountered. The power of Lu Wu had belonged to those mysterious men in black, but Wang Chong had never imagined that it would cause a change in the Stone of Destiny. But the stellar energy ignition effect of the strength of Lu Wu was truly effective against the current Wang Chong. The effect of the Great Yin-Yang Heaven Creation Art and the ability to burn a quarter of the opponent's stellar energy every 15 minutes might not have been enough to kill Dian Mengpoj, but it was enough to give him a headache. As these thoughts flew through his mind, Wang Chong quickly made his decision. Buzz. With a thought from Wang Chong, the reward for the stellar energy ignition effect in the Stone of Destiny exploded with light. At the same time, an enormous energy, burning like fire and chilling like ice, surged into Wang Chang's body like a great river. This was an extremely uncomfortable feeling, but it only lasted for a moment before vanishing. But Wang Chang's body now had a new energy. This energy was both hot and cold, and it had fused with Wang Chang's flesh, blood, and cells. What a strange energy! Wang Chong quietly said to himself. This energy was very similar to the strength of Lu Wu. It was also brimming with vitality, but it felt even stronger. Moreover, even though his outer appearance hadn't changed, Wang Chong could clearly sense that his strength had increased significantly. I wonder how effective it is. In a little while, when I fight with Dian Mengpoj, Wang Chong thought to himself. The Stone of Destiny's style had always been like this. It would not massively increase one's strength in one go, but rather subtly, a qualitative change. Just the stellar energy penetration was clearly not enough to deal with Dian Mengpoj. With a thought, Wang Chong continued to read. Heart, physique, energy, technique, power, and all sorts of other rewards appeared before Wang Chong's eyes. These rewards were all different, had different abilities, and could be exchanged for different points, but the vast majority of them were not what Wang Chong currently needed. Wang Chong's brow gradually creased as he read the contents of these rewards. Wang Chong didn't care much about Dian Mengpoj soldiers. He already had a solution for everything, but Dian Mengpoj was a problem that Wang Chong had to deal with. Putting aside everything else, if he failed, Dian Mengpoj would immediately launch a frenzied campaign against Qixi. Dian Mengpoj's actions were bold and unconstrained, and not even Wang Chong could predict them. He could only guarantee that while Dian Mengpoj's attacks were ineffective against him, they might not necessarily be effective against the Qixi Protectorate. Moreover, the penalty of 2,000 points of destiny energy for mission failure was something that Wang Chong had no choice but to consider. Suddenly, Wang Chong's eyes flitted across the technique reward and paused at the very end. Karmic Battle Armor. For user only. It can greatly increase user's defensive abilities, allowing user to defend against the piercing effects of any divine weapon. In addition, the armor can be fused with user's stellar energy, allowing user to greatly increase the abilities and strength of martial artists. Exchange requirements. User becomes the controller of fate and obtains the elementary karmic battle armor. Exchange points. 1,400 points of destiny energy. Upgrade. Strengthens the effects of stellar energy. When user imbues stellar energy into the armor, user's level can be raised by 1 level. Bonus, the effect of the upgrade cannot exceed the Saint Martial realm. Bonus, a powerful increase in strength is accompanied by a powerful flaw in strength. The karmic battle armor's increase in strength cannot exceed 2 hours. Furthermore, once it was used, the host would be in a state of dizziness and weakness for about 5 days. In addition, the karmic battle armor could not be used normally for a month. User should use it cautiously. Exchange points for upgrade, 1,000 points of destiny energy. Bonus upgrade, when user pays an additional 80 points of destiny energy, user can store the karmic battle armor in the Stone of Destiny's dimension at any time. At the same time, the armor will obtain the attachment effect. All of the armor will automatically attach itself to the user when summoned, allowing user to quickly put on the armor in any situation. As he read through these lines of information, Wang Chong suddenly sank into deep thought. He clearly remembered that there had been no such reward last time. Could it be? Suddenly thinking of something, Wang Chong quickly focused his attention on the heart, body, energy, technique, and power. Of the 5 rewards, power, the last one was the power reward. Heavenly Battle Armor, sealed. As expected, Wang Chong saw what he had guessed in the last reward for power. But unlike the karmic battle armor, the heavenly battle armor's words were all gray and sealed. As expected, the more destiny energy one accumulates, the greater the reward will be. At the same time, the number of points required to exchange for these rewards will be even more terrifying. Wang Chong quietly said to himself. The items that Wang Chong had exchanged for at the beginning had only required a few dozen points, but things like stellar energy ignition were extremely terrifying. A single stellar energy ignition had consumed 1,200 points of destiny energy for Wang Chong. And the karmic battle armor, with all of its supplementary abilities, cost a terrifying 2,480 points of destiny energy. In the past, he would have only been able to stare at the ocean and sigh. But even though the amount of destiny energy required was astonishing, the effects of these abilities were equally astonishing. Both stellar energy ignition and the karmic battle armor could be used on Saint Martial experts, and the peak of the Saint Martial realm were the imperial great generals of the various countries. There were only a handful of people in the world who could surpass them. But the karmic battle armor was even more astonishing. Although it required 2,400 points of destiny energy, it could forcibly raise one's strength from the imperial martial realm to the Saint Martial realm. It seemed like only a difference of a single realm, but to Wang Chong, the difference was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. At the very least, the power of the great yin-yang heaven creation art at the imperial martial realm was completely different from that at the Saint Martial realm. Time was short, and after thinking for a few moments, Wang Chong no longer hesitated. He first spent 80 points of destiny energy to exchange for the destiny battle armor, then spent 1,400 points to upgrade it to the karmic battle armor, and then he spent 1,000 points to upgrade it to the karmic battle armor. In total, Wang Chong had spent 3,760 points of destiny energy. Now I only have 270 points of destiny energy left. Wang Chong quietly said to himself. The stronger the ability, the more points of destiny energy one needed to exchange for it. Wang Chong did not dare to recklessly use the remaining 270 points of destiny energy. Buzz. Chapter 781. Marquis, have you finished your training? Seeing that Wang Chong was no longer in his stance, Li Sai's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. Yes. Wang Chong nodded. How much time has passed? Are there any movements from the other side? Marquis only meditated for a short while, less than 20 breaths of time. As for the Uzan side, there's no movement for the time being. Li Sai said. Oh. Wang Chong was taken aback. Only then did he understand why Li Sai had such a surprised expression. Although he felt that a long time had passed, 20 breaths. For Li Sai, he probably only meditated for a short while. However, the speed of the space of consciousness was different from the flow of time now. Woo! While they were talking, suddenly, a desolate horn sounded from the Uzan army's camp. The sound was loud and clear, piercing through the sky and resounding throughout the battlefield. Moreover, it was different from the previous bugle calls. This bugle call was filled with a dense and oppressive aura. Buzz! A slight tremor came from the opposite side. Even the grass in front of Wang Chong and Li Sai trembled. Seeing this scene, Wang Chong's expression froze and he suddenly stood up from the ground. Pass down my order, the army is to get ready. Dian Mangpoj is preparing to attack. Wang Chong said in a low voice. Sensing the seriousness in Wang Chong's voice, Li Sai quickly retreated. At the same time he left, Buzz, a powerful aura came from the opposite side. Even from a distance of more than 2,000 feet, one could clearly feel it. Wang Chong looked up and saw that the dark, tide-like Uzan army suddenly separated. A warhorse the height of an adult, white as snow, and 4 blood-red hooves suddenly came out from the depths of the army. On the back of the warhorse, a familiar figure looked over and locked his eyes on Wang Chong. Even from a distance, Wang Chong could feel the icy cold murderous intent and killing intent from the other party. Are they finally going to attack? Wang Chong looked at the opposite side and recognized the figure of Dian Mangpoj at a glance. Although he had defeated Dian Mangpoj twice in a row, Wang Chong did not feel relaxed at all. Dian Mangpoj was a famous general of the Uzan, a fierce general, and the Azura war god of the Uzan. Although Wang Chong and Dian Mangpoj had been impulsive twice before, Wang Chong had either used intelligence or group attacks. As for the orthodox cavalry battle and battlefield confrontation, he had not done it until now. And more importantly, with Dian Mangpoj's character, he would definitely learn from the previous lesson. Without the white smoke created by barley flour, Wang Chong would not be able to create a wave of dust explosion to deal with him. Boy, you're dead. From afar, Dian Mangpoj did not say anything, but Wang Chong could clearly feel a murderous intent from his eyes. The next moment, Dian Mangpoj raised his right hand, as if it was some kind of signal. The densely packed Uzun army separated, and just behind Dian Mangpoj, a completely different army rode out slowly on big horses. Every warhorse in this army was extremely strong. Compared to the barley horses beside them, whether it was the bones or the size, they were much larger. The bulging muscles on their bodies contained more explosive power and impact. And the cavalry on the horses were also different from the other Uzun cavalry. Most of the Uzun people were affected by the highland environment, and most of them were shorter than the Han people. However, every single one of these cavalrymen was extremely tall, and their eyes were gloomy and untamed. Just by casually standing there in a formation, a dense killing intent and baleful aura surged into the sky. There was also a powerful oppressive aura. This kind of powerful aura was not something ordinary cavalry could possess. On the entire highland, only Wang Chong's 5,000 Wushang cavalry could compare. The White Braves. In the distance, the pupils of the Qixi Protectorate's generals constricted as they gasped. Especially He Yi, whose pupils had shrunk to the size of needles. No one had a deeper impression of the White Braves than the Qixi Protectorate. The Qixi Protectorate had used the lives of 5,000 soldiers and Pulin He to deeply understand just how powerful and terrifying Dian Mangpoj and his White Braves were. To the Qixi Protectorate, that night was like a nightmare. Although there were only 2,000 some White Braves, each one was like an evil spirit from the underworld. One after another, the Qixi Protectorate soldiers charged forward, but in the face of the iron hooves of the White Braves, they were thrown into the air like broken kites. 1, 2, even 3 Qixi Protectorate soldiers charging together were unable to stop the advance of the White Braves. Formidable strength, frightening methods, and a callous heart that would never be moved by the outside world, the power of the White Braves made even these seasoned Qixi soldiers tremble in fear. That was a bloody night that no one was willing to recall, not even He Yi and the other generals of the Qixi Protectorate. Buzz. Time seemed to stop. As everyone watched, Dian Mangpoj swung down his right hand. Rumble. The earth quaked as 5,000 mighty and high-spirited White Braves surged out from Dian Mangpoj's left and right. At first, they were slowly picking up speed, their hooves growing heavier and heavier. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, the 5,000 White Braves were charging at full speed. The earth quaked and dust churned. Although there were only 5,000 soldiers, the charge of the White Braves seemed to be able to topple mountains and overturn seas. It was like what was charging at them was not 5,000, but 50,000, perhaps even more. Nay. As the 5,000 soldiers were charging, a heaven-shaking neigh came from behind them. In a flash of white light, Dian Mangpoj had charged out from the rear. Clang! A metallic clatter resounded over the battlefield. The moment the great snow mountain steed's front hooves touched the ground, a dark red halo began to expand from beneath Dian Mangpoj's feet. Rumble. The earth fell silent as a fierce light engulfed the battlefield. In the blink of an eye, that dark red war halo had spread to the feet of every White Brave. In just a few moments, the aura of the 5,000 White Braves swelled to an inconceivable level. Not only that, the dark red halo had fused all their auras together, giving off the impression that they were moving fortresses, immovable and unshakable. Buzz! In the distance, even the silent Fomin Linta couldn't help but widen his eyes at this sight. This Dian Mangpoj truly does have some ability. Fomin Linta's prized general, Pulin He, had been killed by Dian Mangpoj, as had his 5,000 soldiers. Fomin Linta wanted to use him to deal with Wang Chong, but deep in his heart, Fomin Linta's desire to kill Dian Mangpoj was no less than Wang Chong's. But even so, Fomin Linta had to admit that Dian Mangpoj truly was a frightening foe. That kind of powerful halo wasn't something ordinary cavalrymen could withstand. In this aspect alone, Dayan Mangpoch's training of soldiers was far superior to that of ordinary commanders. Foman Linta was reputed to be extremely skilled in training soldiers, and the soldiers he trained were as disciplined as steel. Thus, although the Qixi Protectorate did not have many soldiers, it was still able to firmly defend Qixi. Neither Uzun nor the Western Turkic Khaganate could do anything against the Qixi Protectorate overseen by Foman Linta. But even the soldiers trained by Foman Linta paled in comparison to the white braves trained by Dayan Mangpoch. Even Foman Linta had to admit this. If he were the one facing Dayan Mangpoch's 5,000 braves, Foman Linta would definitely put all his strength into the fight. Dusong Mangpoch might be very strong, but he's probably no match for this Dayan Mangpoch in the art of war. A person like this in Uzun is truly a calamity for my Tang dynasty and Qixi. If possible, the first person I kill after killing Wang Chong is him. I don't want him to grow into a bigger problem. As Foman Linta thought to himself, a harsh killing intent flashed through his eyes. Ready. As he saw the 5,000 Uzun white braves charging toward him, Wang Chong waved his arm, a grave look in his eyes. He would never underestimate any opponent, much less a formidable foe of the Tang dynasty like Dayan Mangpoch. Li Sai, in a little while, prepare the 10 charges 10 victories formation. Wang Chong sternly ordered as he looked into the distance. Yes, Marquis. Li Sai could also sense the gravity in Wang Chong's voice and quickly left. In all the time that Li Sai had been with Wang Chong, this was the first time he had seen such a solemn expression on his face. In the past, no matter what sort of opponent he faced, Wang Chong had always been able to remain calm and composed. But this time, he was completely different when dealing with Dayan Mangpoch. Li Sai could sense that Wang Chong was being far more cautious in dealing with Dayan Mangpoch than any other opponent he had faced. Wang Chong could sense that Li Sai was flabbergasted, but Wang Chong did not explain. Although he had never interacted with Dayan Mangpoch in his last life, Wang Chong had heard far too many legends about him. Dayan Mangpoch was a madman, but he was also an extremely frightening opponent. Moreover, he would eventually become an imperial great general of the Uzun, an existence that surpassed even Dusong Mangpoch. In the past, there were far too many legends about how he had destroyed cities and countries. Moreover, an existence that could lead the 5,000 white braves to stop the Mamelukes after the defeat of the Tang dynasty could not be some ordinary individual. Chapter 782. All soldiers, hear my order. Change formation. A thunderous voice came from behind him. With Li Sai's order, the 5,000 Wushang cavalry behind Wang Chong began to change formation. The 5,000 Wushang cavalry in Nei immediately changed formation, their horses neighing and their armor clattering. In just a single change in formation, the entire army's aura had changed, and a cold and bitter baleful aura soared into the sky. This simple change instantly attracted the attention of all the soldiers. Even the surrounding vegetation around the 5,000 Wushang cavalry became somber. "Milord, what's going on? What a thick baleful aura. What did that brat do?" Those Wushang cavalry seem different. The change in the Wushang cavalry quickly attracted the attention of the soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate. In the tense atmosphere of the battlefield, any change on either side was enough to attract everyone's attention. No one knew what Wang Chong had done. The 5,000 Wushang cavalry had not moved, but they gave off a completely different feeling. They had become even more dangerous and fierce. Anyone who looked at Wang Chong's army from a distance would instinctively feel a deep sense of unease. If one looked carefully, they would even feel that the 5,000 Wushang cavalry were surrounded by some invisible energy that blurred the air around them. No one had ever encountered such a situation before. Although no one knew what was going on, they could all sense that the Wushang cavalry had undergone a formidable transformation. "It seems like they've changed into some sort of formation." Of the Qixi generals, no one was more experienced and more knowledgeable than the commander of the Western Front, Heba Yi. His pupils constricted as he stared intently at that place. Heba Yi knew almost all the formations of the Tang dynasty like the back of his hand. He alone could change into many different formations, and he could use different formations depending on the situation. Heba Yi had fought in the western regions for many years, and there were few people who could compare to him in this aspect. But not even Heba Yi could recognize what sort of formation Wang Chong was using. Something that exuded this sort of aura was definitely a top-class formation. There was no reason why he had never seen or even heard of such a thing. "Milord," Heba Yi subconsciously turned to Qixi Protector General Fomin Linta. In terms of experience, no one here could surpass Fomin Linta. As Qixi Protector General and one of the most elite great generals of the Tang dynasty, there was probably nothing he did not know. But to Heba Yi's surprise, he turned his head and saw that Fomin Linta was frowning as he stared at Wang Chong. It was apparent that he was also confused. Heba Yi's mind trembled, and he instantly found himself speechless. "Milord." The change on Wang Chong's side had attracted far more than just the attention of Fomin Linta and the Qixi Protectorate. In the rear of the Uzun army, a famed general turned with a stern expression to Dusong Mangpoj. Dian Mangpoj's 5,000 white braves were truly formidable, but the Tang dynasty's Wushang cavalry were equally fierce. After seeing the 5,000 Tang people charge through the enemy lines and chase down the Uzun like they were vegetables, no one dared to look down on them. The corpses strewn across the battlefield that had still not been cleaned up were the price of looking down on the Tang people. In the rear of the army, Dusong Mangpoj said nothing, his expression as tranquil as an ancient well. But those familiar with him could clearly see that when Wang Chong changed his formation, Dusong Mangpoj's body had slightly leaned forward, his muscles slightly tensing. But Dusong Mangpoj's body quickly relaxed and returned to its original state. "Milord, those Tang people aren't easy to deal with. Should we send soldiers to reinforce General Dian?" An Yusang general turned his head to Dusong Mangpoj, a nervous expression on his face. When the news that Daluan Ruozan and Hushu Wuzong had been defeated by that youth of the Tang dynasty in the southwest, these people had still been somewhat skeptical, but after witnessing that inconceivable explosion, they now viewed that ordinary youth of the Tang dynasty as a god. "There's no need." Dusong Mangpoj's eyes flickered for a moment before returning to normal. "Dian Mangpoj's 5,000 white braves are more than enough. His 5,000 soldiers are the strongest force we have here. If not even he can deal with them, sending anyone else will just increase the casualties." But back then, Daluan Ruozan and General Hushu Wuzong, an unwilling Uzun general, wanted to say something, but he was quickly interrupted by Dusong Mangpoj. "Daluan Ruozan is Daluan Ruozan, and Dian Mangpoj is Dian Mangpoj. Moreover, the army of the Ngari royal lineage is far from being able to compare to the 5,000 white braves." Dusong Mangpoj indifferently said, and then he seemed to think of something and slightly creased his brow. "But your words are somewhat reasonable. Zagong, take 5,000 soldiers with you to help." "Yes, milord." An Uzun general replied and swiftly left. Rumble. A few moments later, another cloud of dust rose from the Tibetan formation. With the sound of the horn, a second wave of Tibetan cavalry left the formation and galloped away, following the 5,000 white braves. Translated by Hypersheep 325, "Milord, the Uzun formation has sent out more men." Su Kei's heart tightened at the sight of this second cloud of dust, and he subconsciously turned to Wang Chong. "There's no need to pay attention to it." Wang Chong's expression was calm and unperturbed. Their target this time was Dian Mangpoj and his 5,000 white braves. As long as this goal was achieved, Wang Chong didn't care too much about the 5,000 Uzun cavalry behind them. "Ready. On my order, attack at any moment." Wang Chong raised an arm, his eyes fixed on Dian Mangpoj and his 5,000 white braves. The 5,000 white braves were already galloping at full speed, and at the front of the army, Dian Mangpoj's eyes were steely. His aura alone was enough to overwhelm the heavens, enough to topple mountains and overturn seas, surpassing that of an army. As a saint martial expert, Dayan Mangpo's strength had already reached an astonishing level, enough to make the vast majority of martial artists tremble in fear and bow their heads. But Dayan Mangpo's expression was firm, his eyes locked on Wang Chong. It was like the only thing in the world that mattered was killing Wang Chong. No matter what was happening in the outside world, whether it was the 5,000 cavalry sent by Dusong Mangpo, or anything else, nothing could cause even the slightest ripple in his heart. Come. With this strike, I'll pulverize your body. Dayan Mangpo clenched his teeth, his killing intent surging like a tide. Although he seemed crazy, Dayan Mangpo actually preferred to act only after planning, thinking things through thoroughly. The yaks, the highland barley flour, and the entire nest had been mobilized. Even a lion would use its full strength to catch its prey. But it was precisely because of this that Wang Chong had seized the chance to inflict so many casualties in a single explosion. To a proud Uzun, Azura war god, like Dayan Mangpo, more than 20,000 casualties was an absolute disgrace. Thus, in this attack, Dayan Mangpo had cast aside all his apprehensions, all his considerations, all his cautiousness. No matter what tricks Wang Chong had up his sleeve, he would use absolute strength to crush and exterminate him. This time, there would be no more obstacles. On the flat plateau, nothing could stop him. All soldiers, hear my order. Great bond formation. Dayan Mangpo leaned against the back of his horse, his eyes flashing with a savage light. At the same time, he thrust an arm into the air. Rumble. 1,000 zhang from Wang Chong's camp, the 5,000 white braves suddenly roared and changed their formation, a hazy light exploding from their bodies. Buzz. In a flash, as if they had practiced this thousands of times, the 5,000 white braves suddenly transformed into a different formation. This was not the Uzun trapezoid formation, but an unprecedentedly powerful formation. Boom. Ma. Ni. Me. Ma. Without any warning, the space around the 5,000 white braves suddenly became hazy and somber. At the same time, an ancient, majestic, and mysterious voice came from the depths of space and time. This voice contained 6 notes, and with each note, the white brave's aura and strength rose by a level. When the last and 6th note erupted, the 5,000 white braves underwent a heaven-toppling transformation. With the final note, the already powerful force instantly rose to an astonishing level. An aura as majestic as the mountains and seas erupted from the 5,000 white braves, filling the heavens and overturning the earth. Even the distant spectators, Fomin Linta and the Qixi Protectorate, felt a powerful pressure. It was like the 5,000 white braves were not charging at Wang Chong, but at them. Just what kind of formation is this? At this moment, even Fomin Linta slightly paled. He had long ago heard of Dayan Mangpo's reputation, but as the Uzun Empire was located on an extremely high plateau, it had never had much contact with the surrounding countries, making it very difficult for outsiders to obtain detailed information. Moreover, Dayan Mangpo's reputation could not compare to Dusong Mangpo's and the other Uzun great generals, and he had never fought in Qixi, so a top-class imperial great general like Fomin Linta was never within the scope of the Qixi Protector General's observation. Chapter 783. Those Wushang cavalry might be in danger. Next to Fomin Linta, Heba Yi, and the other generals of the Qixi Protectorate stared at the 5,000 white braves, a hint of worry in their eyes. Although they were on different sides, and Wang Chong had even offended their protector general, they couldn't help but empathize with the power of the Uzun soldiers. After all, they were all Tang people, and in the end, the Qixi Protectorate would have to fight with Dayan Mangpo. Rumble. The 5,000 white braves charged together, but they exploded with the momentum of an army of tens of thousands. This momentum was unstoppable and unstoppable. If the white braves at the start could be said to be able to fight 1 against 2, then now that the white braves had completed their formation, they were finally displaying their abilities as the defenders of the Uzun Plateau, the protectors of the royal capital, the protectors of the world, and the strongest soldiers of the Uzun. The white braves were no longer fighting 1 against 2 or 3. They were fighting 1 against 8, 9 against 10, and even 10 against 1. This was the true face of that terrifying army that could contend against the Great Tang's elite Mamelukes on the plateau. Rumble. The plateau quaked, and the earth seemed on the verge of splitting apart. In front of these 5,000 white braves, any famous commander would feel a deep fear and shock, as well as a boundless pressure. They've finally come out. On the other side of the battlefield, behind the steel walls, Wang Chang's pupils constricted as he stared at the surging white braves, an unprecedented solemnity in his eyes. The Great Bond Formation. Dayan Mangpoj had finally used this formation that the white braves had used to fight against the Mamelukes on the Uzun Plateau. This was the most powerful formation of the Uzun Plateau, one that had been passed down from the Great Snow Mountain Temple. Bon represented the Bon religion, the most ancient religion of the Uzun Plateau, one that had been born far before the time of the Uzun Empire and even the Great Snow Mountain Temple. It was the most ancient religion of the plateau. All the people of the Uzun believed that the Great Bon religion belonged to an extremely ancient civilization that had vanished from the plateau. And the Great Bon religion was similar to the Great Snow Mountain Temple of that era. All information about that civilization, including the Great Bon religion, had vanished. Only bits and pieces of it had been passed down, preserved in the Great Snow Mountain Temple for future generations to revere. The Great Bon Formation was a powerful formation of the Great Bon religion that had been preserved in the Great Snow Mountain Temple. Even Dayan Mangpoj's white braves had been trained using the secret arts of the Great Bon religion. The mysterious white designs drawn on the sides of the white braves' horses were the symbols of the Great Bon religion. These had all been passed down from the Uzun Plateau during the era of the Great Calamity. When Dayan Mangpoj's white braves used the Great Bon Formation, they represented one of the strongest cavalry forces of the plateau and the entire world. There were not many soldiers that could stand at this apex, and the white braves were one of them. The Mamelukes of Arabia were also one of them. Wang Chang's Wushang Iron Cavalry was also among them. However, in his previous life, Wang Chong had never had the chance to lead the Wushang Cavalry against the Uzun Azura war god Dayan Mangpoj's white braves. That's fine too. Let's see whose army is stronger. Who is the strongest cavalry in the world? Wang Chong rode on the white-hoofed shadow, his gaze fixed on the other side, an unprecedented light of anticipation flashing through his eyes. In the previous generation, when Wang Chong rose to power, hundreds of generals fell, and the starry sky dimmed. Although he was known as the #1 war saint in all of history and had obtained the recognition of those seniors, he was still a war saint. But deep in Wang Chang's heart, as a pure general, he still felt some regret that he had not been able to compete with those truly powerful foes. The Wushang Iron Cavalry was known as the world's #1 cavalry. Although this title had been obtained in battle with the otherworldly invaders and had been acknowledged by all, the Wushang Iron Cavalry had never fought with the white braves of the Uzun Plateau, had never fought with the Mamelukes that had defeated the Tang dynasty, Gao Xianji, and the Anxi Protectorate Army, and had never fought with the Wolf Fang Cavalry of the Turks. But now, he could finally make up for one of these regrets. Ready. Clang. Wang Chong suddenly drew his sword and pointed it at the wood steel sword. Under the cover of the dark clouds, the silver wood steel sword gleamed with a cold light. In a flash, everyone's energy gathered together, and the 10 charges 10 victories formation began to transform. The 10 charges 10 victories formation, which was only in its embryonic form, suddenly became several times more austere. As Wang Chong looked across from him, the gazes of the 5,000 Wushang Iron Cavalry followed suit. 1,300 zhang, 1,200 zhang, 1,100 zhang, 1,000 zhang. As they got closer and closer, the white braves in the Great Bon Formation began to speed up, their auras growing stronger and more terrifying. Above the 5,000 white braves, the void began to twist, revealing a massive, ancient, white swastika symbol that exuded a powerful pressure. Just by looking at it from afar, one could feel a formless spiritual oppression. But most frightening of all was the energy and strength of the 5,000 white braves fused together. When 5,000 soldiers charged as one, it was truly frightening. But in the face of this state of the White Braves, Wang Chang's eyes remained calm and unmoving. 950 zhang, 900 zhang, 850 zhang, 800 zhang. As the distance grew closer and closer, the energy grew stronger and stronger, but Wang Chong remained unfazed. His eyes were half closed, still waiting for a chance when Dian Mengpo's energy would reach its peak and there would be no turning back. This time, he would not only defeat Dian Mengpo, but also completely resolve this calamity of Qixi. 750 zhang, 700 zhang. The distance grew smaller and smaller, and now, it was less than 2,000 meters. This distance was slowly becoming dangerous. 650 zhang, 600 zhang. Wang Chong, hand over your life. A thunderous voice resounded through the world. Dian Mengpo was the first to shout from atop his divine steed, his spear raised. Humph. Wang Chong sneered and swung down his sword, giving the order to attack. Boom. There was a heaven-shaking boom as the 5,000 Wushang cavalry surged forward like a flood, causing the entire plateau to lose its splendor. Translated by Hypersheep 325, Nay. The warhorses neighed as if some massive creature had torn off its disguise. The 5,000 Wushang cavalry exploded with a terrifying aura. Clang clang clang. Tens of thousands of halos began to descend, wrapping around the feet of the 5,000 Wushang cavalry. In just a few moments, the silent Wushang cavalry had reached an astonishing height, completely blocking the aura of Dian Mengpo's White Braves. If the 5,000 Wushang cavalry had been like a child compared to the White Braves at their peak, then the moment Wang Chong gave the order to charge, the 5,000 Wushang cavalry exploded with energy, instantly transforming from a child to an adult. Although they still couldn't compare to Dian Mengpo with the Great Bond formation, they now had the right to contend against the White Braves. What? Dian Mengpo's pupils constricted, his heart trembling in shock. But it was far from over. Bang! With a metallic clatter, Wang Chang's white-hoofed shadow let out a long neigh and stood up. In a flash of light, a dark red halo began to expand from the white-hoofed shadow's feet to all the Wushang cavalry. The halo of Dusk Stallion. The moment they leapt forward, Wang Chong unleashed his strongest cavalry halo. Clang clang clang. 3 more halos of Dusk Stallion were unleashed, covering the entire army. At this moment, Wang Chong had shown everyone the power of the halo of Dusk Stallion. 100 zhang. The 5,000 Wushang cavalry had reached a frightening speed. Normal cavalry needed 500 meters to reach this speed, but the 5,000 Wushang cavalry had reached it in a span of 100 zhang, 30 meters. 20 zhang. A gust of wind howled out from under the hooves of the horses. After traveling 100 zhang, the 5,000 Wushang cavalry were already leaving behind blurs. It was only 20 zhang, but the 5,000 Wushang cavalry had already reached the maximum speed of ordinary warhorses. 30 zhang. The speed at which the Wushang cavalry were traveling was enough to leave many cavalry dumbfounded and sighing. But with the support of the halo of Dusk Stallion, the 5,000 Wushang cavalry were still able to accelerate. 50 zhang. The earth rumbled as the Wushang cavalry moved like a bolt of lightning, leaving a long white trail behind them, more than 100 meters long. And yet, the 5,000 Wushang cavalry were still accelerating. How could they be so fast? The explosive power and charge displayed by the 5,000 Wushang cavalry had left everyone stunned. The soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate unconsciously straightened their backs in fear, and the distant Dusong Mengpo couldn't help but widen his eyes. It was common knowledge that the faster a cavalry was, the more powerful they were. For Wang Chong to be able to increase the speed of his army within a distance of 50 zhang was simply unheard of. And the 5,000 Wushang cavalry were still accelerating, 80 zhang. The dust kicked up by the army reached a height of 100 feet. 100 zhang. Chapter 784. Impossible. At this moment, Dian Mengpo clenched his teeth, a look of deep shock appearing in his eyes. The Great Bond Formation was a secret technique of the Great Snow Mountain Temple, belonging to an ancient sect of the plateau. This was how the 5,000 white braves had been able to reach such a shocking speed. This was the limit that cavalry could reach. In Dayan Mangpo's understanding, it was almost impossible for any cavalry to be faster than his white braves. But Wang Chong had managed to surpass them in a mere 300 zhang, shattering this limit. But this was not the end. Boom! In a flash of light, a powerful killing intent as vast as the mountains and seas exploded from the bodies of the Wushang cavalry. 10 charges 10 victories formation. This was a formation that had fused the essence of countless formations from the era of calamity and gathered the wisdom of countless people. It was hailed as one of the strongest formations in the apocalyptic era, and it was finally revealing its loftiness for the first time in this world. 10 charges 10 victories. Ghosts weep and gods extinguish. The era of calamity had a total of 10 supreme battle formations, all of which had been selected from the millions of formations of the world. Moreover, they had been further refined and refined, reaching the pinnacle of formations in all of history. They were hailed as the best formations in the world, and the 10 charges 10 victories formation was one of them. 10 charges 10 victories, ghosts weep and gods extinguish. This was the terrifying offensive power of this formation, and there were almost no formations that could block it. This was a supreme offensive technique that was peerlessly swift and fierce. After Wang Chong had obtained this formation, he had modified it, further strengthening its power and making it even more terrifying. At the same time, it was also more suitable for the Wushang cavalry, becoming one of the supreme formations that humanity had used to deal with the otherworldly invaders during the era of calamity. Wang Chong had once used this formation to lead the Wushang cavalry in slaying many otherworldly invaders with incredible vitality and undying bodies, creating many legendary feats. Moreover, although the 10 charges 10 victories formation was not the most powerful of the 10 supreme battle formations, it had the greatest ability to break through formations and defenses. Moreover, the Wushang cavalry had only just learned it and had yet to experience the endless tempering and invulnerability of the later generations. The other formations of the 10 supreme battle formations were still difficult to cultivate, but the 10 charges 10 victories formation was possible. This was also one of the reasons Wang Chong had chosen the 10 charges 10 victories formation. But even so, the power of the 10 charges 10 victories formation was already unparalleled in the world. Uzun's plate armor was the heaviest in the world, and no other country could compare. Dayan Mangpo's Great Bond Formation was also suited to this trait, possessing both offense and defense, with the defense being the most formidable. This was one of the reasons why Dayan Mangpo's White Brute Army had been able to deal a heavy blow to the Abbasid Caliphate's Mamelukes on the plateau. As a classic battle, it was also an extremely influential battle. No one in the art of war would be able to avoid this battle. As the last Grand Marshal of the Central Plains, Wang Chong had once studied all the battles, tactics of the world, and this battle was one of them. According to Wang Chong's analysis, the offensive power of the Great Bond Formation wasn't too ridiculous, but the defensive power of the formation combined with Uzun's plate armor was boundlessly powerful. To the Mamelukes, who had fierce attacks but weak defenses, this formation was the perfect counter. It was like the sharpest spear meeting the hardest shield. The Great Bond Formation was the shield. Anyone who couldn't break through the shield would be hit by the shield and would be passively beaten. This was a legendary classic battle, a clash between the best of cavalry, and one that had been fought on the unique terrain of the plateau. Wang Chong had once analyzed that if he were the one dealing with Uzun's White Brute Army, the best method would be to use the 10 charges 10 victories formation of the 10 great battlefield battle formations. Although the 10 charges 10 victories formation wasn't the strongest in terms of tracking and coordination, it was the strongest of the 10 most powerful formations. As long as it could break through the Uzun's Great Bond Formation, the Great Bond Formation would naturally collapse on its own. And without the support of the formation, Uzun's White Brute Army was nothing to be feared, even if it was astonishingly strong. Thus, the 10 charges 10 victories formation was the best choice to deal with Dian Mangpoj. Buzz! An enormous energy exploded from the 5,000 Wushang cavalry. In a flash, the energy exuded by the 5,000 Wushang cavalry was on par with the Uzun's White Brute army. If one were to say that the Wushang cavalry had given off a gloomy and indistinguishable feeling before, like elite soldiers among elites, then the Wushang cavalry had now exploded in strength, becoming one of the best cavalry in the world. Bastard! There's no way such a thing could happen. Dian Mangpoj ground his teeth, nearly driven mad by this sight. The White Braves were the protectors of the royal capital, one of the best cavalry in the Uzun Empire. All the White Braves had been carefully selected, and Dian Mangpoj had paid an enormous price in order to select the strongest cavalry. Of all the cavalry in the Uzun Empire, Dian Mangpoj had only chosen 5,000, and he had even led them into battle, tempering and polishing them through the endless battles. Only then had the White Braves come into existence. With the current strength of the White Braves, Dian Mangpoj would even dare to charge into an army of 50,000 and defeat them. In Dian Mangpoj's mind, it wasn't that there were very few people who could compare to the White Braves, but that there were none. But Dian Mangpoj had never imagined that on the edge of the plateau he was most familiar with, there would be a group of elite cavalry on par with his White Braves, and that they belonged to the Tang people, to that Wang Chong he wanted to kill. To Dian Mangpoj, this was something he could never accept. But even so, to Dian Mangpoj, this only served to further stimulate his killing intent. All soldiers, hear my order. Kill them all. Leave none alive. Dian Mangpoj roared, his eyes surging with killing intent. No matter what, he would never accept that there was still a powerful cavalry in this world that could stand on equal footing with his White Braves. Rumble. The White Braves' hooves thundered like thunder, filling the heavens with a mountain-toppling momentum as they shot toward Wang Chong and the 5,000 Wushang cavalry like bolts of lightning. At this point in the battle, it was like an arrow on a bowstring. There was no room for retreat. Li Sai, follow me. Wang Chong said. His eyes gleamed as he stared at Dian Mangpoj and the 5,000 White Braves. Yes, Marquis. Li Sai's aura was like a storm as he followed closely behind Wang Chong. The 5,000 Wushang cavalry continued to accelerate, their momentum constantly climbing. A powerful and somber aura soared from their bodies, distorting the air and making everything hazy. Buzz! As the 5,000 Wushang cavalry's momentum reached its peak, a massive golden spear appeared above the army, its tip aimed at the distant Uzun White Braves. Not only that, next to that 10 sum-zhang long golden spear, a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth. Soon, 10 spears covered the army like a school of sharks, aimed at Dian Mangpoj and the White Braves. 10 charges 10 victories. These 10 spears represented the greatest offensive power of the 10 charges 10 victories formation. 50 zhang, 40 zhang, 30 zhang. The winds howled and dust churned as the two sides got closer and closer. This battle had attracted the attention of countless people. Foman Linta and his several dozen Qixi Protectorate subordinates were completely focused, even holding their breaths. In the rear of the army, Dusong Mangpoj had subconsciously straightened his back, his eyes looking forward, the muscles in his neck unconsciously tensing. The entire Uzun army was deathly still, everyone's eyes focused on the two seemingly evenly matched armies. At this moment, the rumbling of hooves drowned out all other sounds, becoming the loudest sound on the battlefield. 20 zhang, 10 zhang, the tension in the air had reached an unprecedented level. The two armies could see the frenzied killing intent and bloodthirst in each other's eyes. Wang Chong could even see the veins bulging on Dian Mangpoj's forehead and the pitch-black hooves of his divine steed. He could even hear Dian Mangpoj's heavy breathing. Right and wrong, now is the time to test them. As Wang Chong looked across from him and listened to the rumbling of hooves, his heart suddenly exploded with an unprecedented desire to fight. Putting aside the grudge between the Tang dynasty and Uzun, forgetting the matter of the Stone of Destiny, as a pure soldier, a war saint who lived for battle, Wang Chong had an incomparable desire to fight with Dian Mengpoj and other top-class generals, brigadier generals, and great generals that he had never fought before. He also longed to fight with those top-class soldiers. This was a regret that Wang Chong had not been able to accomplish in his last life, but at this moment, it was all made up for. Let us see just who is the strongest horseman. Wang Chong stared across from him, his eyes exploding with a powerful desire to fight. Boom! In the next moment, there was an earth-shattering boom as the two groups of cavalry collided fiercely like two surging tides. In that instant, time seemed to stop. The earth rumbled as if an invisible giant hand had smashed into the ground, causing the entire plateau to shake violently. Clang! No one noticed that a milky white halo had expanded from Wang Chong's feet to cover the entire White Braves. The aura of the White Braves swayed, and then dropped. Clang! After the first ring of light, a second ring of light appeared. Bane of the battlefield, and Bane of generals. As the two armies clashed, Wang Chong immediately released his two strongest halos. Rumble! Chapter 785. Neigh. The gales howled and the warhorses neighed. At this moment, warhorse collided with warhorse, saber with sword, stellar energy with stellar energy, halos with halos, all the sounds mingled together, throwing the battlefield into chaos. At this moment, the usefulness of the warhorses was clearly displayed. All the White Braves used the most valiant Highland steeds of the plateau. Each of them had a powerful physique and bulging muscles. They had all been handpicked from thousands of people on the plateau. If these were ordinary horses, the White Braves would only need a single charge to break their bones, but the horses of the Wushan cavalry were different. Although they had been hastily obtained, they were the best horses of the Turkic steppe, comparable to the horses of the Arabs. Boom! 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 The two groups of warhorses collided. The Highland steeds Dian Mengpoj had carefully selected were actually unable to gain any advantage over Wang Chong's Turkic warhorses. Kill! Kill these Tang people! No one can trample on our plateau, no one can insult our general. Kill them all! All the Uzun White Braves madly bellowed, their scimitars whistling through the air. They had a glorious history on the plateau. They had destroyed countless foreign armies, breached capital after capital, killed famed generals, and struck fear into the hearts of countless armies. This was the glory and accomplishment that all the Uzun White Braves were proud of. In the western regions, no one could stop them, and there was nothing they could not break. This was something all the White Braves firmly believed. But at this moment, these guards of the Uzun capital, the strongest cavalry of the plateau, finally understood that there were existences in the world that were not one bit inferior to them. Just like them, these people were top-class cavalry. Bang! The air trembled and sparks flew. A scimitar, borrowing the momentum of a warhorse's charge, fiercely slashed at the enemy. But in a flash of light, these seemingly unstoppable scimitars of Uzun White Braves were blocked by a narrow sword. This sword was not particularly fierce, nor was it very large, but its silver-white blade exuded an inconceivable and mountainous strength. With a single sweep, it was able to block the determined scimitar of an Uzun White Brave, and yet the sword remained unmoved, as if it had taken root in the air. How could this be? When did the people of Wushan get so strong? The White Brave with the scar on his brow trembled. He had participated in the night raid of the City of Steel, and he had even thrown his grappling hook to follow Dian Mengpoj to the top of the city walls. At that time, not even 2 or 3 guards of the City of Steel had been a match for him. In the end, it had been the power of the ballistae that had intimidated them. And that had been during the siege, when they had not been able to display their full strength. He found it impossible to believe that in the wilderness, where they could display their full strength, those once weak Tang people had become so powerful that they could stand on equal footing with them. Humph, fools! Do you really think that no one in the Tang dynasty can stand against you? Before the white brave with the scar on his brow could react, there was a flash of light as a boot rapidly expanded in front of his eyes. With a boom, the boot kicked out from under his horse, sending him flying from his highland steed. Impossible! The white brave with the scar on his forehead crashed into the ground, rolling several times as he was sent flying, his heart filled with shock. As one of the best soldiers of the Uzun, an existence that had once destroyed many small kingdoms, the white braves were extremely experienced in combat. No one had ever fought with them in such a manner. That kick from under the horse's belly had been tricky and impossible to guard against. He had never even thought about using such a method of combat. Not even the valiant and skilled horsemen of the Turks were able to use this method to fight with them. This was the first time he had seen cavalry of the Central Plains that were even more agile and skilled than the Turks. "I can't be bothered with you. You found the wrong person to run into, Marquis." With a sneer, the Wushang horsemen immediately galloped away. These Uzun people were extremely arrogant, completely unable to distinguish the difference between the Tang people and the Tang people, nor did they realize that they were fighting with a completely different group of people. The Wushang cavalry had strict rules and tactics. When fighting, cavalry could only charge, never stop, and they certainly couldn't turn around and chase. All the Uzun people who fell off their horses would be killed by the other Wushang cavalry behind them. Boom! 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 As the two armies clashed, countless people watched as the 5,000 Wushang cavalry displayed their astonishing horsemanship for the first time on the stage of the world. The Wushang cavalry attacked from the abdomen, the neck, and even the buttocks of the horses. They attacked from all angles and positions, and there was nothing that they could not attack. Some of the Wushang cavalry even managed to get under the white braves' horses and attack from the rear, kicking one white brave after another off their horses. These astounding and inconceivable horsemanship techniques were easily displayed by the Wushang cavalry, who had grown up in the mountains and precipitous valleys. This sight left the distant Qixi Protectorate and the distant Uzun army dumbfounded. Heavens, just where did this Wang Chong find these people? Our Tang dynasty has cavalry even more skilled than the Turks. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. This isn't the cavalry we saw before. It hasn't even been 2 months. Just how did he do it? This is a miracle. These cavalry are at least as strong as 2 of us, no. They're at least as strong as 3 or 4 of our Qixi Protectorate soldiers, maybe even more. The Qixi Protectorate generals, Hebai included, were all dumbfounded by this sight. Although Foman Linta said nothing, his eyes were also flickering, making it impossible to tell what he was thinking. General. In the rear of the army, an Uzun general turned his head to Dusong Mangpoj, deep concern in his eyes. This sort of Tang dynasty army was definitely not a blessing for the Uzun. I understand, Dusong Mangpoj squinted into the distance. His voice was flat and indifferent, but everyone could sense the thick killing intent in his narrowed eyes. No matter how Dian Mangpoj ended up, this young marquis of the Tang dynasty and the 5,000 cavalry behind him would all die. Ready. Dusong Mangpoj looked forward and raised an arm. The Uzun general understood, a smile on his lips, and he quickly left. Regardless of what was going on in the rear, the battle on the front had reached its most intense level. The performance of the Wushang cavalry had far surpassed everyone's expectations. One white brave after another fell to the ground, their horses galloping away in a cloud of dust. One group of cavalry after another charged forward, paying no attention to the fallen white braves. Behind them, Wushang cavalry clattered and clattered. Clang! As the white braves looked on in fear, a second wave of Wushang cavalry arrived. The swords in their hands swung through the air, gleaming with cold and sinister light as they slashed at the necks of the white braves. No matter how thick Uzun's plate armor was, it was useless in a place where it could not be protected. No matter how strong the body of flesh and blood was, it could not block the sharp blade of a sword. Ah! Boom! Just when the fallen white braves were ready to be killed, there was a flash of white light from where the swords had struck. A milky white barrier of light covered the necks of the white braves, blocking this sure kill blow. Determined to succeed, the combined attack of man and horse only managed to send the white braves tumbling through the air, but it didn't kill them. This sudden sight left all the Wushang cavalry dumbfounded. How could this be? How could the body of flesh and blood stop the sharp blade of a sword? Not even they would have been able to block the full-strength charge of the cavalry, but not only had the white braves managed to block it, they didn't seem to have suffered any serious injuries. This was not something that should have happened in a normal battle. And what was up with that thin layer of white light around the necks of the white braves? This was the first time the Wushang cavalry had encountered such a situation, and they had no idea how to explain it. Moreover, 80% of the reason the white braves had been able to block the full-strength attack of their warhorses was because of that thin layer of white light. Ha ha ha! At this sight, one of the white braves roared with laughter and stood up. His face had been covered in fear, but now it was filled with excitement and no fear. It's the great Bon priest. A white swastika rune appeared on his forehead. This rune seemed to contain a special energy. Cack-lack. The power of the rune surged through his body. In a flash, the white brave's muscles began to bulge and his bones began to grow taller. His strength seemed to instantly double. Bang! The white braves punched. As Nei's horse neighed, his fist struck the belly of a Wushang warhorse that had leapt over his head. The enormous force sent the warhorse and the Wushang rider flying ten-some-zhang. Boom! 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 Similar scenes were taking place everywhere. One white brave after another began to swell in strength, sending the Wushang cavalry around them flying. Chapter 786. Bzzz 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 bzzz. At this moment, on the other side of the intense battlefield, in a place where no one could see, 6 white braves officers wearing thick plate armor with robes peeking out from under the armor were holding 6 green pocket-sized pots in their hands. These pots were covered in layers of inscriptions, all of them engraved with all sorts of strange and mysterious beast inscriptions. Along with a series of incantations, an indescribably mysterious force burst out from the small pot, transforming into numerous mysterious and obscure green magic symbols, slowly revolving around them. The energy of the 6 white braves resonated with each other, slowly rippling through the army and connecting with the symbol on the foreheads of the white braves to form an enormous formation. The heart of the Great Bon was one of the 6 tools left behind by the Great Bon cult of the Zhangzheng dynasty, and it was also the reason why the Uzan Empire had been able to reactivate the Great Bon formation after so many years. The reason why the Uzan Empire had been able to hold off the Abbasid Caliphate's Mamluks with 5,000 soldiers was not only because of the white braves' strength and the top-class plate armor of the plateau, but also because of the heart of the Great Bon. No one knew the principles behind the heart of the Great Bon, but they knew that once these 6 tools were gathered, the heart of the Great Bon could be activated, granting all the white braves an inconceivably powerful defense. Li Sai, form the 10 charges sweep. 6 assault squads, move out. Destroy the heart of the Great Bon. Before the white braves could use the heart of the Great Bon to launch a counterattack, Wang Chong gave the order, and the 5,000 cavalry behind him suddenly changed formation. Like a massive turbine, they began to rumble and rumble as they swept through the battlefield. This sudden shift instantly disrupted the white braves' formation. Even though the white braves had dominated the world and possessed peerless fighting power, they were still unable to withstand the sweep of the 5,000 Wushang cavalry. Not only that, with the clattering of horse bells, 6 powerful cavalry units charged forward. Cheng Sanyuan, Su Shixian, Chen Bin, and Su Ke each led a unit of cavalry in 6 different directions of the white braves. Bang! 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 All the white braves in their way were sent flying, none of them able to last a single exchange. Whether it was Cheng Sanyuan, Su Shixian, or Su Ke, the 6 of them were leading the elite of the Wushang cavalry, each of them at the 2nd or 3rd tier of the profound martial realm. Coupled with the threefold amplification of the halo of Dusk Stallion and the charge of their warhorses, each of them was at tier 5 or 6 of the profound martial realm, far surpassing the ordinary Wushang cavalry and white braves. Even though the Great Bond's heart had powerful defensive abilities and could increase a person's strength, the increase was not as great as the Great Bond's heart. Stop them! A frantic voice echoed through the battlefield. Dian Mengpoj paled at the sight of Qing Sanyuan, Su Shixian, Chen Bin, Su Kei, and the other 6 armies charging in unstoppably. The Great Bond's heart was the core secret of the White Braves. Although the Great Bond formation could still display its power without the Great Bond's heart, its power was greatly reduced. Dian Mengpoj had always placed great importance on secrecy. Unless it was an extremely important battle, he would not lightly use the Great Bond heart. Coupled with the fact that the plateau was cut off from the rest of the world, outsiders would find it difficult to obtain information from the plateau, so very few people knew of the Great Bond heart. Dian Mengpoj had never imagined that an outsider like Wang Chong would know of the Great Bond's heart's existence, and that he had even prepared 6 groups of cavalry specifically to deal with it. If the Great Bond heart was broken, the White Braves would be greatly weakened, and the Great Bond formation would lose half its power. This was not a result that Dian Mengpoj could accept. Darren, Zambwa, go! Dian Mengpoj harshly said. No matter what, the 6 armies Wang Chong had sent had to be stopped. Yes, milord. At Dian Mengpoj's side, 2 seemingly extremely powerful Uzun generals with bulging temples immediately left to carry out the order, several armies following closely behind them. But before they could get very far, rumble. Countless Wushang cavalry surged forward like a flood. With a single strike, they scattered the 2 generals under Dian Mengpoj's command. Gallop! Gallop! The Wushang cavalry charged forward, and in just a few seconds, the 2 Uzun generals had disappeared without a trace. As they saw the dense ranks of Wushang cavalry around them, Darren and Zampa instantly paled. On the other side, when Dian Mengpoj saw this scene, his heart was filled with rage, and he gritted his teeth harder and harder. In Dian Mengpoj's life of war, this was the first time he had encountered a powerful formation that could rival his Great Bond formation. The offensive power displayed by Wang Chang's 10 charges 10 victories formation was even more terrifying and fierce than his Great Bond formation. Damn it! Brat, hand over your life! Dian Mengpoj roared, and he squeezed his horse's abdomen. His eyes were bloodshot, and he charged murderously at Wang Chong in the middle of the army. In neigh, the warhorses neighed, and their voices were as loud as metal. The tall and strong Great Snow Mountain divine steed charged forward like a meteor. Bang, bang, bang. Everywhere it passed, the Wushang cavalry were sent flying like kites with their strings cut. Some of the Wushang cavalry even screamed as they were sent flying by Dian Mengpoj's stellar energy 7 or 8 zhang into the air. None of the Wushang cavalry were a match for him, and certainly none could stop his advance. Ha ha ha, Dian Mengpoj, if you want to fight, I'll fight with you. All soldiers, hear my order. Disperse. Wang Chang's eyes brightened at the sight of Dian Mengpoj charging at him like a demon god. Not only did he show no fear, he even began to exude an intense desire to fight. Dian Mengpoj was the core of the formation, and at the same time, the target of Wang Chang's operation. As long as he could kill him, he could complete the mission for Qixi and completely eliminate the threat to Qixi. Neigh! The neighing of Wang Chang's horse completely drowned out the neighing of the other horses. After nearly a year, Wang Chang's white-hoofed shadow had completely matured. Its body was tall, its bones sturdy, and its muscles bulging. Wang Chong had used a special method to circulate stellar energy in its body, and it was now brimming with explosive power. Its strength, speed, sturdiness, and defensive capabilities all far surpassed that of a normal warhorse. It was completely capable of standing on equal footing with Dian Mengpoj's divine steed of the Great Snow Mountain. Rumble. Wave after wave of stellar energy flowed from Wang Chang's body into the white-hoofed shadow. Halos vibrated as Wang Chong became one with his horse, his speed instantly reaching the limit, leaving a long trail of white energy behind him. Good. Dian Mangpoj was not alarmed by this sight, but rather delighted. You're seeking death, so don't blame anyone else. Bang! Dian Mangpoj fiercely squeezed his horse's abdomen and charged forward. As countless people watched, Wang Chong and Dian Mangpoj crashed into each other like two shocking waterfalls, one on the left and one on the right. Boom! Just as Wang Chong and Dian Mangpoj crashed into each other like two comets, another tall and majestic figure crashed into the other by a hair's breadth. In that moment, the world seemed to shatter, the deafening sound drowning out the sounds of fighting on the battlefield. On the outskirts of the battlefield, the Chishi Protectorate and the other Uzan warriors who were not participating in the battle could clearly see a milky white ball of light explode in the center of the battlefield like a sun descending to the mortal world. Bang! Outside the explosion, countless Wushang cavalry and white braves were unable to dodge in time. Screaming, they were sent flying in every direction. Humph! Where did this nameless pawn come from? Scram! In the center of the battlefield, Dian Mangpoj looked at the mountainous figure charging alongside Wang Chong, his eyes flashing with savagery. He swung the spear in his hand and thrust it at Li Sai. Boom! Stellar energy shot out in all directions. Li Sai's confident strike was blocked by Li Sai's Wuzi steel sword, which was taller than a man. The Fergana horse Li Sai rode neighed and retreated under the tremendous force, but in the end, it managed to block the attack. Ha, Dian Mangpoj, he's not the nameless pawn you say he is. Li Sai, let's kill him together. Wang Chong breathed a sigh of relief at this sight. Although Dian Mangpoj was known as the Azura war god of the Uzan Empire and the great general king at the end of the calamity, Li Sai was not some nameless pawn. His title of Invincible Great General was more than enough to be recorded in the annals of history. Buzz! With a thought from Wang Chong, the air trembled as the images of a sun and a moon, one yin and one yang, appeared on either side of Wang Chong. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong immediately used the great yin-yang heaven creation art. Rumble! The air in a radius of 100 zhang began to tremble, and under Wang Chong's control, vortexes began to rapidly revolve. The enormous suction even affected the stellar energy in Dian Mangpoj's body, causing the stellar energy in Dian Mangpoj's body to vibrate, nearly bursting out of his body and surging toward Wang Chong. And just as Dian Mangpoj was focusing his attention to suppress the stellar energy, rumble! There was a flash of light as Wang Chong fiercely slashed his sword at Dian Mangpoj. Hand over your life. Without any further words, Li Sai swept his sword horizontally, the stellar energy in his body vibrating as he instantly activated the halo of storm within his body. Within a radius of several hundred zhang, the wind howled, sand and pebbles flew, and everything was covered in a haze. And just as the wind howled, the Wuzi steel sword in Li Sai's hand slashed through the air like a bolt of lightning, viciously slashing at Dian Mangpoj like a tempest. Boom! An invisible wall of stellar energy erupted from Dian Mangpoj's body, blocking both Li Sai's and Wang Chong's attacks. Dian Mangpoj's eyes were sinister, and his pupils radiated with the sharpness of thousands of swords. Chapter 787. Is that so? A sneer came from the wind, and before Dian Mangpoj could finish speaking, a violet flame soared into the sky, wrapping around Dian Mangpoj's stellar energy and setting it ablaze. Ah! Dian Mangpoj let out a low cry as he felt the stellar energy in his body begin to burn. Even with his Saint Martial realm cultivation, he was completely unable to resist this strange violet flame. Bastard! Stinking brat, just what kind of martial art is this? Dian Mangpoj roared and fiercely struck out with his palm. Boom! Unexpectedly, this time, Wang Chong made no attempt to dodge and met Dian Mangpoj's palm head-on. Dian Mangpoj didn't move at all, but Wang Chong and his horse were forced back several steps before he could stop himself. Saint Martial Realm. This is impossible. It's only been a few months, so how could you have broken through to the Saint Martial realm so quickly? Dian Mangpoj, who seemed to have the upper hand on the surface, suddenly revealed an expression of extreme shock. He was even more shocked than when Wang Chong and his 5,000 Wushan cavalry had stopped his white braves. Dian Mangpoj was a brigadier general, a true veteran of the Saint Martial realm. To be able to face a veteran Saint Martial realm expert head-on, one had to be at least at the Saint Martial realm. In other words, Wang Chong was also a Saint Martial realm expert. But how was this possible? The last time they had met, Wang Chong had only been at Tier 9 of the Imperial Martial Realm. And that had only been 2 months ago. There was a huge gap between the 9th level of the Imperial Martial Realm and the Saint Martial Realm. The gap was even larger than the gap between the 1st and the 9th level of the Imperial Martial Realm. It was impossible to cross that gap in 2 months, not even the most talented person. Although Dian Mangpoj was known as the Azura of the Uzan and had a brigadier general cultivation, he didn't dare say that he could do this. No. It wasn't just him. None of the generals of the Uzan Plateau had this ability. No. What kind of armor are you wearing? Dian Mangpoj's pupils constricted as his gaze fell on the black armor that had suddenly appeared on Wang Chong's body. This black armor was completely different from any armor Dian Mangpoj had ever seen. The armor was pitch black, yet it revealed an indescribably noble and dignified aura. It was as if it was the king of armor. Any armor, including the secret plate armor of the Great Snow Mountain Temple that Dian Mangpoj was wearing, would pale in comparison to the pitch-black armor on Wang Chong's body. It was like a foot soldier standing before an emperor. What was even more unbelievable was that all the armor in the world was made of metal and should have been incomparably heavy, but the armor on Wang Chong's body seemed to be as light as a feather. Even more bizarre was that although it seemed normal on the surface, Dian Mangpoj could sense that the armor seemed to have a life of its own. It followed Wang Chong's rhythm and breathed in and out. And under the effect of this mysterious energy, even the light in a radius of 3 zhang around Wang Chong seemed to be twisted and gloomy. This was no ordinary armor, and Dian Mangpoj clearly remembered that when Wang Chong rode his horse and fought with him for the first time, he clearly hadn't been wearing this armor. Dian Mangban still had no idea how Wang Chong had managed to put on the armor. Ha ha ha, Dian Mangpoj, a scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at in a new light. Do you think that I'm still an ignorant fool? In this battle, I won't just crush your white braves, I'll also kill you here, so that all the people of Uzan will know what happens to those who oppose the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong gripped his sword, his eyes shining as his entire body exploded with a will to fight. Stellar energy ignition and the karmic battle armor, Wang Chong had already used all the power he had obtained from the Stone of Destiny. This was especially true of the karmic battle armor. When Wang Chong sent his stellar energy into the karmic battle armor, he immediately felt like he had become one with it. The karmic battle armor was his skin, hair, bones, and limbs, breathing as he breathed. Most importantly, when he put on the karmic battle armor, Wang Chong instantly felt like his strength had broken through an enormous barrier, reaching a realm that he had never even imagined. The Saint Martial Realm. Wang Chong had never imagined that after a lifetime, he would once again reach this powerful realm. This feeling of exhilaration was indescribable. Come on. Dian Mangpoj. The war saint or the war god, let us see who is truly the strongest. As this thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind, he leaped forward with his horse. Bang! In a flash of light, Wang Chong suddenly split into 3 Wang Chongs, their bodies exuding violet energy as they soared into the air and charged at Dian Mangpoj. The 3 horses separation art was an extremely powerful Saint Martial equestrian art. Not only could one create an illusion, but even a horse could, and it was difficult to tell the real from the fake. Wang Chong originally didn't have the ability to use this battlefield charging technique, but now that he had reached the Saint Martial realm, he could use many techniques with ease. What? Dian Mangpoj raised his head, and his body trembled at this sight. the current Wang Chong gave him a completely different feeling. He had become fierce and terrifying, brimming with the sharpness of a sword. Blood Sea Vortex. Despite his shock, Dian Mangban's reaction was not slow. The spear in his hand trembled, and a bloody light exploded forth. In an instant, he displayed the Blood Sea Vortex of the Great Snow Mountain Temple. Bang! Where Dian Mangpo's spear pierced, the space seemed to collapse, and the powerful force created a huge vortex in the air. Scarlet light shone everywhere. The three illusions that Wang Chong had created were immediately enveloped in the range of this technique. Bang! The illusions shattered, and the blazing purple flame sword in Wang Chong's hand collided heavily with Dian Mangpo's spear. However, before Dian Mangpo could counterattack, a white light flashed, and a sharp sword as thick as 2 fingers pierced through the air. With just a slight shake, the void was immediately split in half, revealing a huge spatial crack. Not good. Dian Mangpo's expression chilled, and without even thinking, he lowered his head and dodged to the side. That milky white sword only 2 fingers thick and inconspicuous, brushed past Dian Mangban and crossed Tensum Zhang to stab into a white brave engaged in battle behind him. This white brave who could block a full-strength attack from Wushang's cavalry had his great bond defense instantly shattered. The thin layer of white light around his neck only appeared for a moment before it was pierced through by Wang Chong's sword along with his plate armor. The milky white sword did not stop there. It continued to pierce through a second white brave, then a third, until it had pierced through 5 white brave corpses before dissipating. The 5 white braves didn't even make a sound. After charging a certain distance, they dropped to the ground. Great Snow Mountain Devil Dragon Art. A hint of rage flashed through Dian Mangpo's eyes. He clawed out with his right hand, and a massive black dragon, its eyes like a lake and its back like a mountain, suddenly appeared behind Dian Mangpo, making Dian Mangpo seem like a god of destruction that had descended from the 9 heavens. Rumble. Without the slightest hesitation, Dian Mangpo stabbed out with his spear. The ground in front of him cracked and cracked, sending mud flying. A tyrannical and cold stellar energy brimming with destructive energy swept toward Wang Chong and Li Sai at the same time. Go! At almost the same time, Wang Chong and Li Sai charged forward, their eyes flashing with cold light. The stellar energy incineration, the great yin-yang heaven creation art, and the art of god and demon obliteration all exploded out of Wang Chong's hands. And after reaching the Saint Martial realm, the various martial arts and techniques from his previous life were now at the fingertips of Wang Chong's fingers. As the Grand Marshal of the world in his previous life, as well as the Supreme War Saint, although Wang Chong's strength had not yet recovered to the level it had been 2 years ago, and there were still many powerful martial arts that he could not use, the initial realm of the Saint Martial realm was enough for Wang Chong to use the vast majority of the supreme techniques from his previous life. Boom! 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 Wang Chong moved like lightning. The sword in his hand, coupled with the art of god and demon obliteration sword crisscrossed and transformed the area in a radius of several dozen feet into the most dangerous of hells. And with each exchange of blows between Dian Mangpo and Wang Chong, a portion of the stellar energy in his body would be burned away. The stellar energy incineration was extremely effective against an opponent of Dian Mangpo's level. In contrast, the great yin-yang heaven creation art was far less effective against a brigadier general of the Uzan Empire like Dian Mangpo, who was also a veteran Saint Martial realm expert. Moreover, after the battle at the City of Steel, it could be seen that Dian Mangpo had once again put in a lot of effort into his internal energy. He had tempered his internal energy until it was as solid as a boulder, making it even harder for the great yin-yang heaven creation art to absorb it. But even so, there was still an endless stream of internal energy pouring into Wang Chong's body. Even though Dian Mangpo was the Azura war god of the Uzan Empire and possessed incredible strength, he was still unable to break free. And this was because Wang Chong had only cultivated the yin-yang heaven creation art for a short period of time, and his level of mastery was still shallow. Boom boom boom. Winds howled, sand and pebbles flew. Whether it was Wang Chong or Dian Mangpoj, both of them were moving with extreme speed. Even though they were riding on horses, their movement techniques and speed were no different from when they had dismounted. In this aspect, not even the cavalry of the Wushang Empire could compare. Plateau Dai, hand over your life. Chapter 788. In the battle between Dian Mangpoj and Wang Chong, the only one who could participate was the future invincible great general, Li Sai. Moreover, the Battle of Wushang's City of Steel was different. At that time, Wang Chong had relied entirely on Qing Sanyuan, Su Shixian, Su Kei, and the other officers of the army to form an array. Only by mobilizing more than 200 people had they managed to force back Dian Mangpoj. But Li Sai was different. Of all the subordinates under Wang Chong's command, he was currently the strongest. No one could take away his existence. And Li Sai was so powerful that even a brigadier general like Dian Mangpoj could not ignore him. His techniques were bold and unrestrained, but his stellar energy contained explosive power. Every time his attacks landed on Dian Mangpoj's stellar energy, though they were blocked, they still consumed a significant amount of Dian Mangpoj's stellar energy. Even Dian Mangpoj, the Azura war god of the plateau, felt apprehensive and frustrated, but there was nothing he could do. Damn thing. I'll kill him first. Dian Mangpoj's mind was brimming with killing intent. Boom. After forcefully pushing back Wang Chong, he turned his spear and thrust it at Li Sai. This strike was extremely sudden and extremely fast. The air where the spearhead pierced through collapsed, forming a series of vortexes. Even the light was distorted, becoming incomparably dark. And the destructive power on the spearhead was enough to pulverize metal. Li Sai had not yet reached the Saint Martial realm, so if Li Sai had been struck by this strike, he would have been heavily injured if not killed. Buzz! To everyone's surprise, Li Sai, who had always charged forward in a bold and unrestrained manner, seemed to have sensed this move ahead of time. The moment his Fergana steed charged forward, it suddenly pulled back and galloped backward, dodging Dian Mangpoj's murderous strike. Boom! The tip of the spear spewed out energy, transforming into a long black dragon. Like a violent torrent of water, it rushed out dozens of zhang. With a heaven-shaking boom and the neighing of horses, the White Braves and Wushang cavalry were sent flying in every direction. Where the pitch-black spear chi struck, the battlefield was thrown into chaos. Bastard! Dian Mangpoj cursed in his heart, but he had already missed his chance. On the other side, Wang Chong had already taken advantage of this opening to attack. Violet flames covered the heavens and earth, instantly entangling Dian Mangpoj's stellar energy like kerosene. Dian Mangpoj's stellar energy instantly began to burn. Stellar energy incineration, the great yin-yang heaven creation art, and the stellar energy piercer. Dian Mangpoj's strength clearly far surpassed Wang Chong's, but his body was being cut down and weakened. In front of Wang Chong, he was unable to display any of his power. Boom boom boom. While Wang Chong, Dian Mangban, and Li Sai were locked in a fierce battle, 5 massive explosions came from the other side of the battlefield, each one triggering a heaven-shaking explosion. Majestic waves of energy swept through the battlefield, blowing sand and stone into the air and stirring up 6 fierce gusts of wind that engulfed the entire battlefield. Translated by Hypersheep 325. Along with these 6 loud bangs, it was as if something invisible had shattered. On the battlefield, a thin layer of energy rippled out, instantly vanishing from the 5,000 White Braves' bodies. On the battlefield, the White Braves, whose divine power had been greatly boosted and invulnerable to swords and spears, were suddenly like punctured rubber balls. Their strength plummeted, and they were instantly pushed back to their original level of strength and cultivation. Some were even a little inferior. For a moment, all the White Braves stood there in a daze, not knowing what to do. Not good. Dian Mangpoj had been putting all his strength into killing Wang Chong and Li Sai, but when he heard these 5 explosions and sensed the changes in the White Braves, he paled, his usually calm face paling. The heart of the Great Bon. Dian Mangpoj was well aware that these 5 explosions had been the sound of the heart of the Great Bon being broken and the formation shattering. Although the heart of the Great Bon had 6, and 5 had been broken, leaving only 1, in truth, without the other 5, even if there was 1 left, it would be meaningless. A single vessel was not enough to form a formation that could support the entire army. Even worse was that in previous battles, the enemy simply did not know of the heart of the Great Bon's existence or simply could not break the Great Bon formation's power, so the heart of the Great Bon had never been damaged. But once the heart of the Great Bon was broken, it was not just a matter of the defenses being broken. Forcefully breaking the formation would also cause the army's overall strength to drop. In the current situation, this was an extremely fatal blow. Ha ha ha, all soldiers, hear my order. 10 charges, 10 victories, break apart the Uzun army's formation. Wang Chong roared with laughter. Although Dian Mangpoj had been painstakingly concealing the Uzun's heart of the Great Bon, he had not been able to hide it from Wang Chong. The 6 cavalry divisions that had specifically targeted the heart of the Great Bon had finally shown their effects. Now that the heart of the Great Bon had been broken, everything was going according to his plan. Now, it was finally his turn to act. Rumble. Following Wang Chong's order, the Wushang army suddenly changed formation. If the Wushang army had been like a whirlpool at the start, then the Wushang army had suddenly transformed into a massive sword wheel formation that was cold, murderous, cruel, and fierce. Accompanied by a surging killing intent, it stabbed into the White Braves. Nay! The warhorses whinnied as one Highland steed after another fell to the ground. The previously unstoppable White Braves were now completely suppressed by the Wushang cavalry. The difference in strength between the two sides was like the difference between the heavens and the earth, and the offensive and defensive positions were completely reversed. Boom, boom, boom. Warhorse collided with warhorse, metal against metal, and White Braves fell to the ground one after another. Unlike before, when he was invulnerable to swords and spears and could send the Wushang cavalry flying with a single punch, the White Braves were no match for him now. Wherever the 5,000 Wushang cavalry passed, the White Braves would be trampled underfoot. Clang! After the charge of the first wave of Wushang cavalry, the second wave of Wushang cavalry galloped forward, their swords cutting through the air and sending the heads of the White Braves flying. Even in death, their eyes were wide open, not daring to believe that they had been defeated on the plateau. And their opponent was the Tang people that they had always looked down on. Li Sai, go! Wang Chong bellowed as he once more charged forward. Dian Mangpoj's mind was in disarray, and Wang Chong could see that his strategy had been thrown into disarray. Now was the perfect time to kill him and complete the mission of Qixi. Stellar energy incineration. Great Yin-Yang heaven creation art. Art of God and demon obliteration. Wang Chong's body was wreathed in violet flames as he used all his most powerful techniques. Meanwhile, the sword in Wang Chong's hand was like a serpent, and all sorts of Saint martial techniques flew out at Dian Mangpoj like a storm. Moreover, his position was constantly changing, sometimes to the east, sometimes to the west, sometimes to the front, sometimes to the back. Not only did the warhorse not restrain his hands and feet, it even made Wang Chong's attacks even more crafty and unpredictable. On the other side, Li Sai was furiously roaring. He had clearly sensed that this was a good opportunity, and the stellar energy in his dantian rumbled like a tsunami. That massive Wuzi steel sword continued to slash at Dian Mangpoj from every direction like a surging river. Li Sai's stellar energy was fierce and tyrannical, so each slash of this massive sword was like a landslide, constantly consuming Dian Mangpoj's stellar energy. Although Dian Mangpoj still held the absolute advantage, his stellar energy was constantly being consumed, and it was no longer as dense as it had been before. Damn it! You two bastards! It's all the same if I kill you first. Dian Mangpoj's eyes were scarlet, and he could not restrain his rage. Before today, he had always believed that his white braves were the best of the best, their tacit understanding far surpassing the other soldiers. Only when he saw the Tang dynasty's Wushang cavalry did he understand what true training was, how to advance and retreat, how to cooperate with each other. The gap between them and the white braves was now obvious. When the heart of the Great Bon was unleashing its power, the Wushang cavalry had also suffered a massive blow, but they had maintained their formation, relying on their collective strength to block the white braves' charge. And when the heart of the Great Bon was broken, the Wushang cavalry were able to display their full strength, quickly recovering to their original state as if they had never suffered such a blow. On the other hand, the white braves, perhaps accustomed to crushing their opponents with overwhelming superiority, had no experience in dealing with this sort of situation. Against an enemy stronger than them, the white braves' weakness was immediately revealed. Ah! Screams could be heard as the hundreds of white braves faced wave after wave of Wushang cavalry. The Wushang cavalry had a clear division of labor, seamless coordination, and tacit coordination, and they were completely powerless to resist. As the sword swung, countless white braves fell to the ground, their blood staining the earth and the broken halberds of the white braves sticking out of the ground. Dian Mengpo's heart was dripping blood. From the time the white braves had been established until now, they had never suffered such a heavy blow. This was not a dozen or 20 casualties, nor was it 100 or 200. Chapter 789. Great Snow Seals, Demon Dragon Descends. Dian Mengpo's expression was savage, his eyes crimson. A tyrannical stellar energy exploded from his dantian, causing the temperature in a radius of several dozen zhang to plummet. The entire plateau seemed to have been plunged into a world of ice and snow, the cold winds howling as thousands upon thousands of snowflakes the size of goose feathers appeared in the air. Roar! The sky resounded with the roars of thousands of dragons. The light dimmed as Dian Mengpo suddenly vanished. Above his head, a massive dragon with blazing eyes slashed a claw at Wang Chong and Li Sai. Careful! Wang Chong's heart chilled as he sensed an intense danger. He could not be more familiar with Dian Mengpo's demon dragon art. But this technique was different from all the techniques Dian Mengpo had used in the past. It was not just the name, but its power and appearance were also different. It was even sharper and more powerful. Heaven and earth spin, sun and moon shift, vast heaven-earth art. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong became one with his horse, advancing instead of retreating. Rumble. Thunder boomed as shadows appeared in the air. In the blink of an eye, countless images of the sun and moon crisscrossed as they flew through the air. Under countless gazes, the white-hoofed shadow let out a long neigh and entered the shadows floating in the air with Wang Chong. In that moment, everyone in a radius of several hundred zhang, whether it was the white braves or the Wushang cavalry, suddenly felt a strange sensation. It was like the entire world had been turned upside down, the sky below and the earth above. This dislocation made them feel dizzy and uncomfortable. Vast heaven-earth art. This was a supreme technique of the Great Yin-Yang heaven creation art that was even more powerful than the Great Yin-Yang art. The Imperial Marshal Wang Chong originally did not have the right to use this technique, but now that he was wearing the karmic battle armor, everything was different. Mountain River Reincarnation / When Wang Chong used the vast heaven-earth art, Li Sai dragged his saber with both hands. Without thinking, he spun around and used all his strength to use the strongest move he had so far. Boom! A black storm rose into the sky. Within the storm, a beam of saber chi shot into the sky. It was grand and majestic, stretching for more than 20 zhang. The huge sword chi paused in the void for a moment, and then slashed down at Dian Mengpo with the force of a thunderbolt. Boom! 3 top-notch experts, 3 powerful ultimate moves, at this moment, converged on the plateau of the triangular gap. With an earth-shattering boom, the stellar energy converged and transformed into a blazing sun with a diameter of more than 200 feet. As soon as the sun appeared, it rapidly expanded until it reached a height of 500 to 600 feet before exploding violently. Boom! In that instant, it was as if time had come to a standstill. Boundless astral winds accompanied by destructive power swept across the entire battlefield. This massive boom drowned out the fighting of tens of thousands of soldiers. Even the distant Qixi Protectorate and Dusong Mengpo's army couldn't help but close their eyes, deep fear appearing on their faces. At the level of cultivation of Dian Mengpo, Wang Chong, and Li Sai, their strength far surpassed the imagination of ordinary soldiers. Whether it was the individual white braves or the Wushang cavalry, they were all insignificant in front of experts of this level. Boom! When the white light dissipated, a sturdy figure flew out of the center of the battle along with his horse. It was Dian Mengpo. When Wang Chong and Li Sai worked together, the stronger Dian Mengpo had been utterly defeated. Let alone the Wushang cavalry, even the white braves under Dian Mengpo's command were stunned by this sight. Although Dian Mengpo had been defeated in Wushang's city of steel, that had been in the city, not the plains where the Uzan were skilled. Moreover, Wang Chong had more than 200 experts at his side. Moreover, Dian Mengpo had managed to retreat unscathed, so the white braves did not consider that battle a loss. But in this battle, Dian Mengpo had truly lost. And Wang Chong did not have more than 200 experts at his side. Milord. After the initial shock, all the white braves began to rush toward the place where Dian Mengpo had fallen, hoping to save their commander. But before they could act, one group of Wushang cavalry after another charged forward, cutting through the charging white braves and scattering them. Kill him! Wang Chong looked at the place where Dian Mengpo had fallen, and a savage light flashed in his eyes. Without even thinking, he urged his horse forward. If he wanted to kill Dian Mengpo and remove the threat that was Qixi, today was the day. The vast heaven-earth art truly is formidable. It can't even be mentioned in the same breath as the great yin-yang art. As the wind howled around him, a thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind. Wang Chong was sure that Dian Mengpo had been injured, and his organs had been severely injured. The vast heaven-earth art was a supreme technique of the higher level of the great yin-yang heaven creation art that his master had taught him, and its power was inconceivably powerful. Not only could it digest, absorb, and control the stellar energy of an opponent, it could also target Saint martial experts like Dian Mengpo who had stable true essence. It could flip and shift the organs of their bodies and heavily injure them. No matter how much stellar energy an opponent had, they would find it very difficult to block this move. The evil emperor was an existence that struck fear into the hearts of all those on the evil path, and his opponents were all top-class experts with extremely stable true essence. Some of them had even cultivated supreme techniques to stabilize their true essence to resist the great yin-yang heaven creation art. Alas, these techniques were useless against the evil emperor's vast heaven-earth art. The vast heaven-earth art could injure their organs, shift them, and scatter the rock-solid true essence in their bodies. Then there was the great yin-yang art that followed, instantly draining these renowned figures of the martial world dry. The evil emperor had never been shy about this in front of Wang Chong. Dian Mengpo was a Saint martial expert, and the quality of his stellar energy was even higher than his own. If he could absorb all of this stellar energy, he would definitely be of great benefit. Rumble. With Wang Chong in front and Li Sai in the back, the two charged at Dian Mengpo like bolts of lightning, leaving two long trails of energy behind them. This was an extremely rare opportunity, and they had to kill him no matter what. However, in the blink of an eye, just as the two of them rushed out, a sudden change occurred. Dash, Kai-il. Whoosh! Tens of thousands of shouts converged into a massive wave. Behind the white braves, the 5,000 Uzan cavalry had circled around the white braves' obstacle and were charging in from the flanks. Although they had arrived late, the 5,000 Uzan cavalry had arrived just in time. Even though these soldiers were far weaker than the Wushang cavalry and the white braves, they were still enough to cause a wave of chaos. Retreat! Just as Wang Chong and Li Sai were distracted, a figure rose from the ground and galloped away in a cloud of dust. Wang Chong and Li Sai both felt their hearts skip a beat when they saw that snow-white divine steed of the Great Snow Mountain. It was Dian Mengpoj. Even though he had been struck by their combined attack, it seemed that Dian Mengpoj's injuries were not as severe as they had imagined. Hiya! Dian Mengpoj's order immediately caused a massive reaction among the White Braves. Having lost the heart of the Great Bon, the White Braves were no match for the Wushan cavalry. Now that they had received Dian Mengpoj's order, all the White Braves immediately began to retreat. Pass on my order. Have the entire army pursue. In addition, kill the second group of Uzun cavalry. Wang Chang's callous voice resounded over the triangular gap. The Uzun's Great Bon formation was simply too powerful. This mysterious energy that had been passed down from the ancient Zhangsheng dynasty was something that not even Wang Chong could see through. Although the Bane of the Battlefield and Bane of Generals halos were still effective against the White Braves, they were not as powerful as imagined. This was the first time Wang Chong had encountered such a situation. But even though the two halos were affected by the mysterious energy of the Great Bon formation, they were still effective against these ordinary Uzun cavalry. Dian Mengpoj's Great Bon formation could not affect these ordinary Uzun cavalry. Kill! Swords and sabers clattered as the Wushan cavalry charged forward in pursuit. Boom! The second group of 5,000 Uzun cavalry was instantly routed by the Wushan cavalry. On the Nei, under the charge of the 10 charges 10 victories formation, row after row of Uzun cavalry fell. They were not a match for the Great Bon formation at all. The impact of the 10 charges 10 victories formation sent wave after wave of Uzun cavalry crashing into the ground, turning the plateau into a sea of dust. Not good. Run! They had not realized it when they had been watching from afar, but now that they had clashed with the Wushan cavalry, they could sense just how powerful this fearless army of Tang people was. The first to charge was the first to flee. Rumble. Dust billowed as wave after wave of soldiers fell. When the 10 charges 10 victories formation pushed the momentum and strength of the Wushan cavalry to the limit, it was not something that these people could withstand. Blood flowed out of the plateau like a river or an ocean. Everything had happened too quickly, and no one had been able to react. 500, 600, 700, 1,000. The corpses of the Uzun soldiers littered the plateau. A battle to provide support had instantly turned into a battle to flee. The Wushan cavalry was at the rear, and the two armies were at the front. They chased after the Tang soldiers, and screams of misery rang out incessantly. The entire battlefield was in chaos. Faced with this situation, not even Dian Mengpoj could turn the situation around. He could only release the halos around his body and do his best to cover his army in order to reduce their losses. As for bringing up the rear, Dian Mengpoj did not even dare to think about it. Chapter 790. Kill. Shouts and roars resounded throughout the plateau, shaking the heavens and the earth. This clash between the strongest soldiers of the White Braves and the Wushan cavalry had ultimately become a one-sided pursuit. All soldiers, retreat. As the Wushan cavalry were cutting down countless Uzun soldiers in a cloud of dust, Wang Chang's eyes flashed as he raised an arm and gave the order to retreat. This order was so sudden that all the excited Wushan cavalry who had been immersed in the pursuit were left dumbfounded. Their galloping speed suddenly slowed, and even the dust they kicked up dissipated. All soldiers, hear my order. Retreat. Li Sai's voice quickly resounded over the plateau. When the two commanders gave the order to retreat, no one hesitated. All the soldiers drew an arc across the plateau, decisively giving up on the pursuit and retreating to the base in the rear. The flexibility of the Wushan cavalry was on full display at this moment. Wang Chong had barely given the order to retreat, but in just a few seconds, the several thousand Wushan cavalry had turned around and pulled away from the pursuing Uzun soldiers. Nay! Not long after Wang Chang's forces had turned around, there was a fierce neighing of horses. Behind the fleeing white braves and Uzun soldiers, a massive black war banner slowly rose into the air, pointing in the direction the Uzun army was fleeing in. On the bottom of the black flag, a snow-white giant eagle was extremely eye-catching. Dusong Mengpoj. This Uzun imperial great general had been sitting in the rear this entire time, maintaining a calm mind, but when Dian Mengpoj was defeated by Wang Chong and Li Sai, Dusong Mengpoj could no longer sit still. He ran so fast. Just a little bit more and we could have caught him. The army parted like a wave. Dusong Mengpoj's eyes were like an eagle's, and he rode a divine steed from the great snow mountain to the rear of the army. His aura rose and fell, thick and boundless, like an unbroken mountain range. Although Dian Mengpoj had always been known as the Azura war god of the plateau, possessing the cultivation of a brigadier general and only a step away from the great general level, he still paled in comparison to a top-class great general like Dusong Mengpoj. Although it was said to be only a step away, this step was actually an enormous chasm. "Milord, should we still pursue? Perhaps we can catch up to them before they return to camp." A voice came from the side as a Tibetan deputy stuck his head out, a look of unwillingness on his face as he stared at the roiling dust behind Wang Chang's group. In a battle between armies, it was very difficult to pay attention to the rear. Moreover, they had done their best to take advantage of every opportunity and narrow their field of vision. If Wang Chang's group had reacted just half a beat slower, perhaps what awaited him would have been the great general's destructive blow. The course of this battle would have been completely rewritten. "There's no need." Dusong Mengpoj shook his head. Wang Chong had reacted extremely decisively and without the slightest hesitation. While the army had won and was in the middle of a frenzied pursuit, Wang Chong had still been able to promptly stop. This was an extremely rare trait. This was proof that Wang Chong had been able to maintain a calm and rational mind. There was probably no need for him to pursue them now. Moreover, Dusong Mengpoj gave a profound glance in Fomin Linta's direction, a hint of caution in his eyes, but he quickly looked away. "Retreat." Dusong Mengpoj raised a palm. This was enough to stop Wang Chang's Wushang cavalry and further reduce the number of casualties suffered by the Uzun army. This was more or less enough. Boom! With a clanging of metal, the Uzun army retreated to a camp more than 2,000 zhang away. At almost the same time, Wang Chang's army returned to the protection of the steel walls. This fierce battle had ultimately ended with Dusong Mengpoj's intimidating entrance and the restraint on both sides. These Wushang cavalry are truly too powerful. They actually routed the White Braves to this extent, even defeating Dian Mengpoj. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I would never have believed it. The young Marquis truly is extraordinary. No wonder he was able to defeat the soldiers of the Ngari royal lineage in the southwest. We've all underestimated him. How shocking! How could our Tang dynasty have such a formidable character? Not even the Uzun are a match for these soldiers. As the soldiers in the distance slowly parted and calmed down, all the soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate army, from top to bottom, were deeply stunned. 5,000 against 10,000, and against the strongest of the White Braves. This battle had left a massive wave in everyone's mind. Moreover, although they did not dare to say it out loud because of the Protector General's position, deep in their hearts, seeing Wang Chong defeat and sweep away those infamous Uzun soldiers had given them a thrill and a sense of glory. After all, at this moment, they were all Tang people. "General." Many pairs of expectant eyes looked at Heba Yi, who was at the side. At this moment, all of them felt an impulse, a hot-blooded impulse to charge forward and fight alongside Wang Chong, to defeat the Uzun on the plateau. After all, the Qixi Protectorate was the true guardian of the plateau, the true opponent of the Uzun. If a person who was not a member of the Qixi Protectorate and did not have the duty to protect it could put his life on the line, what reason did the Qixi Protectorate have to retreat? Heba Yi said nothing, only turned to Protector General Fomin Linta. But unlike the other Qixi Protectorate soldiers, Fomin Linta's face was extremely gloomy. Heba Ye's heart trembled, and he subconsciously glanced down. He saw that Foman Linta's hands had at some point been tightly clenched, and those powerful hands brimming with destructive power were now suffused with a luster like black iron. Heba Ye's heart chilled, and he no longer dared to say anything. Li Sai, how are you? Pass on my order. Take a head count and investigate the losses. In the distance, behind the silver steel fortresses, Wang Chong pulled on the reins of his horse and turned to Li Sai. Dian Mangpo's stellar energy was extremely tyrannical and robust, and he was also extremely skilled and experienced in battle. Moreover, the incident at Wushang's City of Steel had clearly stimulated him. After a period of bitter cultivation, Dian Mangpo had become even stronger. Wang Chong could rely on the defense of the karmic battle armor to deal with him, but Li Sai was different. In the end, it was still too early. Li Sai was still not that tyrannical invincible great general who could single-handedly alter the course of the battlefield. With his current imperial martial cultivation, he would still be at a great disadvantage in a battle with Dian Mangpo. It's nothing, just a small injury. Li Sai's expression was calm, his determined face unperturbed, but Wang Chong could clearly see that the armor on his right shoulder had caved in and shattered. Blood was constantly seeping out from beneath the armor, its scarlet color a ghastly sight. But Li Sai didn't seem to see it, acting like it was someone else who had been injured. His body was as straight as ever. Wang Chong carefully examined him for a few moments before finally nodding. Although his strength was inferior to Dian Mangpo's or his, Li Sai's vitality clearly far surpassed his cultivation level. The trembling of stellar energy might have been a heavy injury to others, but to Li Sai, it was still within the range of what he could endure. There's still a major battle ahead. Take this pill. It'll be good for your injuries. In addition, take an inventory of our losses. As Wang Chong spoke, his expression gradually turned solemn. Wushang village could be said to be the best source of soldiers for the Tang dynasty. Even the weakest were close to the profound martial realm, and the vast majority had surpassed it. Add to this the skills they had trained in such a harsh environment, and the Wushang cavalry were naturally among the strongest cavalry in the world. However, their opponents were still the strongest of Uzun's white braves. Even though Wang Chong had made all sorts of preparations beforehand, some injuries were still unavoidable. A few seconds later, the casualties of the Wushang cavalry were reported to Wang Chong. Of the 5,000 Wushang cavalry, only 4,678 remained. A total of 322 Wushang cavalry had died in the battle just now. In addition, more than 700 had suffered light injuries, and more than 300 had been heavily injured. All told, the number of dead and wounded had reached more than 1,300. This was the first time in the history of the Wushang cavalry that they had suffered such heavy losses. For the Wushang cavalry, which numbered only 5,000, this was a very large number. The White Braves had always been invincible, and this sort of opponent was not going to be easy to deal with. What about the Uzun side? Wang Chong asked after a moment of silence. Their losses should be greater than ours. Li Sai said, his voice resounding. Although it's impossible to count them one by one, the Tibetans should have lost more than 1,800 men and injured more than 2,000. If Dian Mangban hadn't reacted so quickly and given the order to retreat, the Tibetans would have lost their lives. The number of their casualties should be far more than this. In addition, the 2,000 Uzun cavalry that came to reinforce them were killed by us in the first wave of reinforcements. 1,800 was no small number for the 5,000 White Braves. In comparison, the deaths of 322 Wushang cavalry was a small number. This also proved that the Wushang cavalry had the strength to suppress the White Braves, and this advantage was not small. Wang Chong gave a long sigh and finally nodded. Although he had wanted nothing more than to devour the entire White Braves in one fell swoop, not even the 10,000 Mamelukes had been able to do so. For the time being, it would be very difficult for him to do so. We can only wait for the other woozy steel and meteoric metal to arrive and refine the armor and weapons to increase the strength of the Wushan cavalry. Only then can we go and exterminate the elite cavalry of the Turks, Arabs, and Uzan. Chapter 791. The Wushan cavalry had only been established for a little more than 2 months, and they were still far from reaching the level of power of his last life. In other words, there was still much room for growth. Li Sai, order the army to rest where they are. In addition, we can carry out the plan we made earlier. Dusong Mengpo's side will probably move very quickly, much faster than we imagined. Yes, Marquis. Once the order was given, the army behind the steel walls quickly calmed down. How is it? Can you still hold on? 20,000 some zhang away, in the Uzan camp, Dusong Mengpo rode over and stopped not far to the right of Dian Mengpo. Are you looking down on me? Do you think that I can't beat 2 Tang people? Dian Mengpo's face was gloomy and hateful, and his teeth were clattering. Dusong Mengpo could sense the indignation in Dian Mengpo's heart, but he only smiled. You rest on the side. Leave this child called Wang Chong to me. Dusong Mengpo indifferently said. Impossible. Dian Mengpo immediately refused. This time, I admit that I was indeed careless. Let me rest for a while, and I will personally behead him. Let me do it. Dusong Mengpo's lips curled into a faint smile. I can do it, Dian Mengpo fiercely said. Let me do it. Dusong Mengpo spoke once more. His voice was neither loud nor soft, but his tone had changed, leaving no room for doubt. Dian Mengpo froze for a moment, and then he finally raised his head to look at Dusong Mengpo. The two stared at each other. Dusong Mengpo, who usually had a gentle expression and would back down whenever Dian Mengpo made a request, had a much firmer look in his eyes, a toughness that had never been seen before. Dian and Dusong were the 2 great aristocratic families of the Uzan Empire. They had a long history and enormous influence. Both families had many experts and outstanding figures, and they had personal relationships with each other. Thus, the relationship between Dian Mengpo and Dusong Mengpo was the same. As long as Dian Mengpo decided on this operation, Dusong Mengpo would not interfere, much less refuse. But this did not mean that Dusong Mengpo had completely indulged Dian Mengpo. In the northern border of the Uzan Plateau, Dusong Mengpo was the true commander-in-chief, wielding the highest authority. If Dian Mengpo could not defeat his opponent even after using all his strength, then it would be his turn to make a move. Dian, war is not a game. I've already given you a chance, and the Tsenpo will not allow us to suffer any more defeats. Moreover, this is not a negotiation. Dusong Mengpo had finally revealed his side as an imperial great general. Whether or not Dian Mengpo was the Azura war god of the plateau, or how formidable his white braves were, at least for now, Dusong Mengpo's status was firmly above his own. Dian Mengpo stared in a daze at Dusong Mengpo. In a daze, he seemed to understand something and finally lowered his head. Although he was unwilling, at least for now, he did not have the strength to challenge Dusong Mengpo. Humph, that brat. No matter what, I will personally kill him. Dian Mengban did not argue any further, and with these words, he rode away. This defeat was an enormous humiliation to him, and someone of Dian Mengpo's personality would never easily give up. But this time, Dusong Mengpo said nothing more. Heba Yi, pass on my order. All soldiers are to retreat at full speed. Retreat 10 li. In addition, everyone else is to leave with me. At this moment, no one noticed that in the northwestern part of the Uzan Plateau, Fomin Linta was leaning forward on his horse, a vicious light flashing through his deep eyes. A bunch of useless trash. I've waited here for so long, but in the end, it's still me who has to fight. Fomin Linta viciously glared in the direction of the Uzan army, his heart filled with extreme dissatisfaction. This battle was completely different from what he had imagined. Even with so many Uzun soldiers and experts like Dian Mangpoj and Dusong Mangpoj holding the line, they had still failed to kill a 16 or 17-year-old Wang Chong. This greatly disappointed Fomin Linta. The result of this battle made it impossible to carry out many of the follow-up plans he had made. Fomin Linta was very unwilling to make his actions so obvious, but in order to achieve the effect he wanted, he could only do this. Gallop! Before anyone else could react, Fomin Linta had already turned his horse around, parted the crowd, and galloped off into the distance. Behind him, the generals of the Qixi Protectorate were dumbfounded. No one had expected Fomin Linta's actions. Didn't you hear? Let's go. He Yi glanced in the direction of Wang Chong, a complicated look in his eyes, mixed with sympathy and guilt. But he quickly waved his hand and led his generals away. From the start of this battle to now, the Qixi Protectorate had sent people to observe, and even Fomin Linta had appeared on the front lines. But this time was different. All the generals and scouts of the Qixi Protectorate had withdrawn from the battlefield. Not a single person remained. Buzz. It was fine when the Qixi Protectorate had not moved, but now that everyone had withdrawn from the battlefield, this sudden action immediately attracted the attention of both sides. Marquis, it's Fomin Linta, and the Qixi Protectorate. A voice suddenly rang out. In the distance, behind the steel walls, the sound of the horses galloping away from the Qixi Protectorate caused everyone to turn their heads. Su Qi rode his horse to a place not far from Wang Chong, a hint of nervousness in his eyes as he gazed at the roiling dust. The air around him was suddenly fraught with tension. This time, Fomin Linta wants to draw out Dusong Mangpoj. Li Sai suddenly took a few steps forward and looked into the distance, his expression extremely solemn. Wang Chong gave a firm nod, his expression extremely solemn. He's running out of patience. Even if the imperial court condemns him, he'll still use the hands of Uzun to kill us. Fomin Linta had always been a hidden danger. In order to eliminate him, he would stop at nothing. As an imperial great general, not only had he not led the Qixi Protectorate to reinforce him, he had instead turned his back on Dusong Mangpoj to draw him out. This sort of behavior was simply despicable. It seems like whether or not the matter with Uzun can be resolved, I have to think of a way to remove him from the position of Protector General and have him transferred away. Wang Chong quietly said to himself, his resolve to deal with Fomin Linta grew even firmer. As expected, he still left. In the distance, Dusong Mangpoj finally smiled at the sight of the eagle unfurling its wings and soaring into the sky behind Fomin Linta. Although Fomin Linta's actions seemed extremely abrupt and unexpected to others, Dusong Mangpoj had expected all of this. Whether it was the strangeness of Qixi Protector General staying out of this war or his deliberate opening of the gap to allow Dian Mangpoj to pass, Fomin Linta had made his intentions clear. But Fomin Linta was still a veteran general who had made his name many years ago. He wanted to use Dusong Mangpoj's strength to deal with Wang Chong, but that didn't mean that Dusong Mangpoj wouldn't use this chance to deal with Dusong Mangpoj. As long as there was a chance, Dusong Mangpoj was sure that Fomin Linta would attack him, using this opportunity to obtain merit and request a reward from the Tang Dynasty Imperial Court. In this battle, Dusong Mangpoj had spent the greater part of his energy on guarding against this Qixi Protector General. Only now, when Fomin Linta left of his own accord, withdrawing all his soldiers, did Dusong Mangpoj finally relax. Fomin Linta, many thanks. Since you're so sincere, I'll fulfill your wish. I'll kill this youngest son of the Wang clan for you. Dusong Mangpoj heartily laughed as he looked into the distance. He quickly turned his gaze to Wang Chong and the several thousand Wushang cavalry. The time was ripe. It was time to end this battle. Ren Gong, pass on my order. All soldiers should get ready to attack. This time, I will personally command. Dusong Mangpoj said. Yes, milord. The fierce Uzun general called Ren Gong was invigorated by these words. Without another word, he immediately left to pass on his order. I didn't think that our second meeting would end like this. What a pity. Dusong Mengpoj turned his head to look at Wang Chong and the Wushang cavalry, a strange light in his eyes. No matter how clever Wang Chong was, how powerful his tactics were, or how many times he had defeated Dian Mengpoj, when Fomin Linta retreated and Dusong Mengpoj personally took action, Wang Chong's fate was sealed. Dusong Mengpoj was not afraid that Wang Chong would escape, as there was no way he could escape. No one could escape the pursuit of an imperial great general. And if he did, he would also bury the several thousand Wushang cavalry and the 8,000 some craftsmen who had worked on the construction of the city. With Dusong Mengpoj's understanding of the Tang dynasty, even if he spared Wang Chong's life after committing such a grave mistake, only death awaited him once he returned to the Tang dynasty. Call over General Dian Mengpoj. Tell him that he can quickly get his revenge. With these words, Dusong Mengpoj quickly returned to the center of the army. Boom! Boom! Very soon, the resounding sound of a yak horn with a metallic texture rang out across the plateau. This special texture was something that had never appeared before. Rumble! The tens of thousands of highland steeds began to gallop as they prepared for battle. The stomping of their hooves caused the entire plateau to tremble, the air currents stirring and blowing dirt and grass into the air. Translated by Hypersheep 325. And unlike any other time, Dusong Mengpoj had thrown all his personal soldiers, the tens of thousands of Uzun cavalry, and the remnants of Dian Mengpoj's white braves into battle. Hearing that Wang Chong and the Wushang cavalry could be dealt with, Dian Mengpoj had immediately thrown his white braves into the army. The world was quiet, and there was no sound other than the sound of Dusong Mengpoj's tens of thousands of soldiers. An enormous and suffocating aura began to exude an invisible pressure. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.